12 miles below by Mark Arrows. Chapter 21, The Meadow Underground. The caverns were lit with sunlight, which was not what was expected for a tunnel system half a mile into the ground. But then again, when did anything that involved mites make complete sense? In this case it was a simulation of sunlight, which made traversing through these caves feel more like climbing through a dim chasm instead. There were many ways into these caverns, and hiking up the mountain we naturally slipped into the first passage large enough to squeeze into. Father didn't seem picky about which any would work. Wide warm floodlights scattered across the ceiling, looking like glowing beams of sunlight through the dusty air. Walls took on the shape of geometric cubes intermixed with broken down rocks. Green lights shone through these. Not from mites, but actual circuitry inside the rocks. Wherever there were cracks, the interior revealed some sort of electronics. I couldn't see any buttons or any way to access whatever these cubes had inside. It all just seemed like pure circuitry. More mite creations, though this was the first I'd seen that was both active and yet missing the mites. The tunnel quickly became cramped, and I was forced to get off and walk on my own, crawl on my own for some parts. The Undersiders had a name for a network of tunnels like this, they call it the underpassage. Father said beside me, ducking under a rock overhang. Caverns like these appear on all levels, or at least the ones I've been to. His helmet turned to me, watching as I brushed my hands over the walls. And no, before you ask, I don't know what any of the cubes and electronics on the walls do. As far as I can tell, it is only more mite madness. Okay, but where are the mites? This all looked like mite madness for sure, and it was clearly powered too considering all the lights. But not a single mite that I could see. All these lights were from circuits. Any trick to navigating here? I asked. Seems a little too easy to take a wrong turn and never find the right one again. There are a few tricks, as you would call them, to navigate through the underpassage. Father pointed out to those lights on the walls. Green lights inside the rock cracks signify the tunnel leading up a level. Blue lights mean the tunnels will stay at this level. And the tunnels with red lights? I asked, pointing in one direction we'd passed by. It led to a rock bridge over a chasm, the tunnel at the end held only dim red darkness. Those will lead you down a level. Obviously, we won't be going down that direction. I was rather glad to hear that. The red passageways did not look inviting. Not inviting in the least. Underscore 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 un. We continued making our way into the darker green lit caverns. Two lost souls, one carrying the other whenever it was spacious enough. He wasn't sprinting like he had in the city, but our pace was still quick and efficient whenever he had a chance to push it. The hike was long, and deep into the mountains. Most of the time it wasn't just some closed-up one-way tunnel, but rather filled out into larger pockets, with wide cave ceilings, where we'd have to search the walls for the next tunnel out. The city-building mites had been more like craftsmen, trying to build a massive multi-layered something that when looked at from afar could pass as a city. And inside they'd filled the buildings and pipes with their own constructions. The cave mites were clearly a different breed. These felt more like true artists, with a unified vision. The tunnels and caverns were absolutely breathtaking. Light shafts almost perfectly lined up with the rock platforms, each chipped in just the right way to both balance circuitry and stone. Waterfalls and stepping stones, carefully placed across the streams. No matter where I stood, the view felt like some kind of painting. It gave a feeling that these underground tunnels and rooms had been deliberately built to look undeliberate, but artistic at the same time. They even had perfect little niches to restock our water supplies, the water clear and fresh with easy access by a convenient stone not quite boardwalk, but obviously made to be used like a boardwalk. During a section of walking, I got curious about knowing whether we were walking in the right direction or not. There's always one lit up arrow somewhere in sight at all points, though usually more hidden. So long as you follow the arrow, you'll follow the color's intent. He pointed up at the ceiling. There, about as wide as a hand, was a glowing lit arrow, pointing the direction we'd been walking. Mites always follow rules, and having an arrow somewhere at all times is one of them. They are not always easy to find, however. So, if we're walking down a green path against the arrow, we're walking down a level instead of up one. The entire system screamed of a far more intelligent design, like somehow the mites had gone the extra mile to make them traversable specifically for humans. We were never lost for long, although some ways upwards were more hidden than others, as Father had warned, requiring us to climb up to correctly follow the direction. Some he could outright jump over with me in tow, others would need me to use some grappling gear to climb up. The air here was gradually warmer, and more humid. Still cold to be sure, but no longer cold enough to freeze running streams of water. The ground under felt, and smelled, like the dirt we'd find on the lower levels of the clan bunker. The dirt we'd use to grow gardens. And where there was fertile soil and warmer temperatures, there was life. Unlike the empty mite city, here life had found purchase. Green leafy plants littered the sides and center of caves, clumping together around anywhere the cavern lights shined brightest. Smaller fuzzier creatures would make these shrubs their homes, while mold and fungus called the wet sides of the walls at theirs. Insects were everywhere, buzzing around or otherwise seeking out decay anywhere it could be. And tiny pipe bats swooped around in rippling swarms to feed on those. They stayed clear of us, flying around. Anywhere my light flashed over, there was something to see. Color swirled around me, one mossy pigment at a time. The ground was littered with clues of life, anywhere from animal droppings to outright hoof prints and other tracks. All clan bunkers had an ecosystem of some kind living in the lower levels, even in abandoned bunkers. That's because they all have leaks leading down into the underground. They'd get patched up and walled off as soon as a new clan settled in. Superstition said if any paths into the underground were left open in the clan bunker, machines would eventually stumble upon it and destroy the clan from the inside out. But small things always found a way to sneak past barriers. Are any of the wildlife dangerous? I asked when I spotted bigger tracks on the ground. The wildlife in the clan domains only ever grew as large as a hand. Lizards and rats were among the apex predators. Down here, it might be a different story. Father shrugged at my question. No one travels the underground without weapons, so animals have long learned not to get in the way. He turned his headlights over at the walls, illuminating the colorful moss. Fungus and mold can still kill if you eat the wrong ones, stick with frostbloom if you need food. As for animals, the largest you find down in the tunnels are mountain goats. Predators exist, but they're far more skittish than the goats. He patted the rifle on its strap. Humans are not their preferred dinner. Goats. You're the one who asked what animals were down here. Goats. They can climb better and faster than you can. I'd never seen a goat in real life before, but I had seen them in video archives. Entertainment from the Third Era was generally a luxury, but among the cheaper luxuries. Merchants didn't care much if those wares were duplicated. Books and files containing knowledge were far more controlled in comparison. Maybe if I'm lucky, I might actually see a goat. That would be neat. Underscore 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 un. I'm guessing the big door leads somewhere else, that we're not interested in. I asked, pointing at my discovery. A massive slab of metal shut tight and still. Father had climbed right past it, without bothering to investigate. They also lead roughly the same way that the tunnels do, but mites may fill these with different things. Treasure chests that mites have made, I suppose you would call them. And a different breed of automaton lurks there too. No guide arrows either once you enter the side passages. The main chambers are mostly safe, we'll stick to these. He lowered the rope down to me, which I grabbed and used my legs to rappel upwards as father pulled the rope back up. What sort of stuff? Once, we found a relic armor exploring one of these, not from a chest, but off a dead corpse deeper inside. It had been named Resolution by its owner, an Imperial Crusader that died a century or two ago. The armor was brought back and sold to House Resolution as their first armor. That's why they renamed their house? I thought they made a big speech about dreams they all had and the will of gods as the reason. It was tradition to rename the first armor a house owns after their house name. Father was quite literally wearing Winterscar itself. Subsequent armors were up to whoever owned them first. But superstition ran deep in our culture. Father agreed with my conclusion. They couldn't reconcile the renaming tradition for their first armor with the terrible omen of renaming an armor owned by an Imperial. The whole speech was a cover, but everyone knew the real reason for the name change. He grabbed my hand once I was close enough and lifted me outright past the rock ridge. Once on solid ground, I folded up the rope to stuff back into my backpack. Without the environmental systems inside, the thing was quite a bit lighter and more spacious. It was the only relic armor we'd ever found in the tunnels in our decades of expeditions. Other things we found in those chests usually ended up being small trinkets or items that the Undersiders needed. Levels further down have more powerful treasures. I was itching with the need to examine the door, to see how it worked, but that's been tampered down greatly since coming down here. Constant life or death struggles does that to a person, go figure. Instead I settled for appeasing some other bits of curiosity that wouldn't cost us time. Can you tell me anything about the lower levels? Stories, or things that happened down there? The tunnel entrance ahead was lit with green, and a tiny arrow glinted slightly off the bottom left side, hiding behind a tall rock. He climbed over a particularly large rock, then grabbed my collar and lifted me up. When I was in a better state of mind, there were some sights I remember well. We traveled down to a meadow once, on the second level. An escort mission to keep a few of our traders safe until they could arrive at the next Undersider hold. One moment we're walking through metal and steel alleyways. And then the next, this vast plain, almost like the surface wastes. Except all green, and breathable. Grass grew everywhere, with the occasional trees scattered around. Grass. Odd plant. Completely worthless for food, so it only exists in books and videos. Nobody in their right mind would waste space and soil to grow grass. The Undersiders had an entire field of it. What weird folks! But I suppose if they're living in a massive plain, then space wasn't a luxury. I'd only seen pictures of grass on records when I was a boy. I enjoyed the ocean and forest pictures too. However, meadows always seemed something more to me. I thought it was how the gods had wanted the surface to look like. How it was supposed to have been. A massive plain of green, stretching in every direction, where you could walk the ground on bare feet even. Instead, something went wrong in their plans and now it's all ice and snow. Plains, forests, oceans, deserts, beaches, all of that was right mystical stuff that you couldn't really believe existed. I'd read about these in old stories at first and just assumed they were fantasy tropes for a long time. It threw me in for a loop once I'd seen real video footage. Father shook his head. I didn't have many other chances at leisure, there was training to do. Winterscar's last owner had disowned his sons, and offered the armor up in challenge to anyone in the house. You remember your grandmother? She made a bid for the armor through me. Yes, I remembered her. A sociopath who saw everyone as tools to be used for her own purposes. Highly clever political creature that one had been. She'd thrown away father, her own son, the moment mother died and he fell into the bottles. She took charge of me thinking I could be molded into her next proxy pawn, playing the long game. She'd tried with Kedra but cut her losses within the month. My sister was outright immune to the crazy old bat. So grandmother decided a newborn would be a cleaner slate, even if it did take years before I could speak. Glad she bit the ice early enough. Though I'm worried some of her lessons might have sunk deeper inside than I'd thought. She certainly knew how to groom someone into a weapon, from how father had ended up as. To me, father had always been someone you avoided whenever he arrived back home, until he passed out and it was safe again. Or else you'd end up with bruises. Less of a person and more a force of nature, like a storm that blew into the house each night. Kedra and I had gotten used to him in our own ways. She still remembered who he had been before the bottle and I'd simply never known him as anyone other. I hadn't thought much about how his own life must have been like, growing up with a parent like that. Grandmother clearly hadn't missed where his potential was, and it sounded like she cut out anything that didn't maximize her goals. You asked what I remember the most about the underground. That would be it. Father said, ever walking forward. There were battles and people I had met and befriended as well. If they still consider me their friend after he paused for a moment. After I stopped serving as a relic knight. Did you go back there every now and then, to the meadow? While you were still active? No. We only went there once. The hold refused to let us inside. That sounds like undersiders all right. I mean, I understood. Scavengers had a reputation as thieves, and I suppose we somewhat deserved it. We do pick the bones of the dead on the surface. They didn't want anything our traders could offer, even if it was useful. Father said, smolder in his voice. Ugly scrapping thing, their city. Black castle towers, rock walls and all. It looked like a blight on the land. There was heaviness in his voice as he talked. Seeing that town, how it sat so strangely in the middle of that meadow. I could almost understand how the machines might view us. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. I've seen hundreds of different biomes, Keith, some teeming with far more life. But I never traveled into something as simple and as beautiful as that. Chapter 22, The Goat. It was about half an hour into the trek that one of those large sealed doors did something Father hadn't ever seen before. We were traveling through another open pocket when the random door ahead suddenly turned bright gold instead of the usual lighting that doors had. And then it flashed, on and off, as if trying to catch our attention. Father drew out his rifle, considered for a moment, and then decided to just ignore the doorway and continue the path, gun still at the ready. The blinking increased frantically, but soon we were too far into the chamber and other rocks obscured our sight. They didn't stop winking. Each room we reached had one door glow bright gold and begin winking. The pattern and frequency sometimes changed, and each and every time, Father stubbornly ignored the call. I'll not take chances, he said when I asked about the blinks. Apparently he'd never seen that happen before. The less encounters with the machines, the better our chances of survival is. There's no need to add more unknowns. We're not here to explore. I, of course, wanted to see what was behind those doors all the more. Was it a good idea? No. Absolutely not. I'd rather take a shower under the sun. Father had sound reasoning. Still, that part of me that wanted to touch everything was trying to convince me about pulling something. A friendly reminder to myself, everything happening right now was the direct result of the last time I pulled something. More time into the climb, the air started to feel drier and colder. Discomfort built up in my ears and I'd have to move my jaw to clear out the air in my ear. We were making our way closer to the surface now. Artificial sunlight seemed to be more and more sparse, as if power was beginning to be disconnected the further up we went. Our headlights soon became one of the few sources of light guiding our path up, mine still strapped on the right side of my chest, just under my neck. Moss stopped growing and the rustle in the bushes also became a distant memory. It was getting colder now. I even started to notice the occasional clump of frost bloom appearing wherever the cavern light still worked. Frost bloom was notoriously weak to the competition of other plants from what we've found in the bunkers. If they were starting to appear here, we might be running too close to the surface. And that would be my dead end so long as I didn't have a spare rebreather. I wasn't sure what the plan was once we got closer to the surface. Maybe he'd go ahead and make contact first, then have the rescue team return with a spare rebreather for me. That's how I'd go about it, were I in his shoes. The issue was that I'd have to be left alone for a few hours, and those screamers were clearly designed to hunt down solo targets. Machines could have looked like anything, yet they seemed to have been built from the ground up to terrify first. Still, if it had to be done, it had to be done. Screamers didn't have specialized eyesight like he'd mentioned before. I might be able to find a crevice and hide inside, out of sight. It was in one of these murky, more empty chambers that Father raised his hand to signal enemy contact. They're not usually in the main chambers like this, he muttered to himself, but shook his head and slowly backpedaled. Machines. He nodded gravely. Up ahead, on the ceilings. Don't make too much noise. They didn't spot us. No, these are dormant in their nests. They wait for prey to walk under them. We'll just search for another way up and sidestep them completely. Plan in motion, we turned and backtracked. As much as I'm sure the machines would love our company, I think I'm good for one lifetime. Underscore 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 un. I got to see a goat, eventually. The large animal chomping down on shrubs with a few others of its flock. They looked way bigger than I'd expected, filled with hair and creepy eyes. They watched us warily, preferring to turn and go down another tunnel rather than stay and risk the pair of strangers. Watching how they effortlessly hopped around on the rocky shelves, finding any small perch, I could see why they'd done well down here. Plenty of plant life to eat, too big for the swarms of pipe bats, and no issues with mobility. Supposedly there must have been predators down here too that hunted them. Though like Father had said, they clearly stayed out of our sight. But besides the goats, we'd found no other way around after 2 hours of walking. It looked like the nest of machines had picked this part of the cave system specifically since it was the only path within several miles, a crosspoint of sorts. Everything else had been either a blue tunnel, the wrong direction, a cave-in, or red and dark. Machines aren't stupid, clearly. And so we found ourselves back where we'd started from. If I were more superstitious, I'd say somebody had jinxed me. Keith, you need to listen to me very carefully now. Father said. He pointed to the ceiling, where I saw white spike-like shapes that bloomed over everywhere he pointed the helmet lights at, almost like massive spiky flowers. Those are all machines, 3 different kinds make up these nests. They have next to invisible lines of string layered around the chamber. You won't be able to see them, but the relic armor can. I'll tell you how to navigate and you need to make sure you replicate all of my motions exactly. There's so many of them. Maybe 2 or 3 dozen shapes. Rat shit, I could see why he called it a nest. Do we have a plan if there's a mess up? I asked. No, he answered curtly. This breed fights with far more coordination than previous ones you've seen. It takes a full team to hold off even a smaller nest like this. Alone, we can't even reliably run. Their only weakness is that they sleep until something triggers their trap, and they're greedy. Greedy. They don't like to share their targets. They get especially sloppy when victory seems assured. I nodded, understanding the gravity of it. Like fighting 2 lost humans. Exactly. But there's very few ways to make use of that in our situation. The best and only plan forward is to not wake them in the first place. We'll take our time and move through this room as slowly as we need to. There's no time limit. No time limit except for the drugs inside his body. We still had to get him to the surface before a day went by. What about explosives? I asked, glancing down at his utility belt. There was one unspent grenade he'd wisely saved during that first fight. He knew they'd avoid any explosion after they learned from the first one, so he hadn't bothered wasting it. The ones that can be killed by an explosive stay far up on the ceilings. The ones that come down, they'll survive an explosive like this one. It'll be a waste. No, assuming we make it past this room, the grenade needs to be saved for later. The room was large, filled with different nooks and crannies, some wide enough to easily walk and others too thin that even my slimmed-down environmental suit would get caught on. I wasn't worried about rips in the weave anymore, I had bigger issues with this suit than that. There was a stark and absolutely clear difference between this cave compared to the others. The entire place was littered with steel spikes as long as my arm, bedded into the rock, all at different angles. It reminded me of a ring of swords, the traditional dueling grounds of surface clans. A massive empty circle of dirt, with a ring of cheaply printed metal swords embedded everywhere at the edge. Occult weapons could cut through armor and permanently cripple a knight. Anything less powerful than an occult weapon would bend and break with the sheer force behind a swing in armor. So duels were fought with simple and cheap metal swords. Part of the skill was to reach the edge of the arena and pull out another sword, when the one in use broke. But the ring of swords was far more organized and densely packed. This landscape was simply chaos incarnate. The metal spikes were everywhere, with no rhyme or rhythm, but sporadic enough I could traverse through them. They had no relations to the tripwires, as I quickly found out. I suppose that would have been too obvious. Plants and moss still grew haphazardly around in the dim light, but there wasn't a single rustle of shrubs or any frantic rats running out. The chamber was silent as a grave save for the water leaking through on its way down. I had a feeling machines hunted more than just humans. Underscore 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 un. As planned, we moved methodically through. Occasionally Father would crawl forward and I'd have to repeat the same, each time praying under my breath nothing would trigger. Sometimes we'd have to turn back and retrace our steps as Father got sight of what was around the corner. I got a feeling he was picking the easiest possible route, even if it came at a cost of time. A few tracts of land were clear of traps, so that gave us a moment to collect ourselves and bypass quickly. Things were progressing well enough until we heard the panicked sound of a goat, far behind us. Father froze, then swore under his breath. I turned to look at the source of the noise to see a lost youngling. Red stained its wool, and it staggered around, hooves clopping on the solid rock with feeble purchase. It looked exhausted, as if it'd been chased up here. It's going to trigger the room. Father hissed, drawing his rifle up. It would be a hard target at this range, an even harder shot without another hand to stabilize the weapon. The goat continued to move, baying and approaching where we'd started. Had it followed us here? Or more probably, whatever was chasing it knew better than to come into this room. Father took a deep breath and held the rifle, aiming down sights as best he could with one hand. No shot came. I could tell he was second-guessing himself, and he couldn't afford to miss the shot here. He lowered the rifle a moment later and scanned around, then ran over to a large rock. There he took a kneeling stance, using the rock to stabilize the rifle, replacing his useless left hand. Like this he had a much better chance of hitting the target. He'd have to pull off an expert shot at this distance. I raced through my mind for possible ideas or ways to even the odds. Maybe we can hit somewhere in front of the goat, to spook it away. That would be a lot easier to hit. Father shook his head. Can't take that chance. It could run the wrong way and trigger a trap at the side of the cave. Can we make a run for it? No, if they wake up, they'll chase us down. Winterscar is a powerful armor, compared to the other armors, but even it can't outrun this foe. He breathed in, held it, and aimed down sights. The crack of the rifle resounded in the chamber, a three-burst shot that flashed through my vision. The bullets hit the rock just behind the goat, making a loud crack echo back. It was too far away for me to see how far he'd missed by, but I had a hunch it was a really close thing. Father swore, and aimed again, taking another shot immediately after. The goat on the other hand, didn't know it was being attacked, but new dangerous sounds were not to be trusted. So the stupid thing bolted straight forward just as the next round of bullets fatally caught its flank. I saw flashes of light illuminate ghostly wiring leading right up the ceiling, as the goat tripped on them, baying and screaming in panic. Not quite understanding just how doomed it truly was now. Dozens of violet robotic eyes flared to life and peered down with glee. Chapter 23, Things of Metal and Pride. Father instantly bailed on the idea of subtlety. He tossed the rifle out of his hands, trusting the strap would hold, and spun around. Hand now free, he reached out and yanked me off my feet, sprinting through the obstacle course, with no regards for any trap. Lights shone as he tripped countless wires. I had a miserable full view on what happened to that sorry goat in the meanwhile. 4 white disc-like bodies landed further away from the dying animal. They struck the ground, dropping from the ceiling on 6 long legs, each limb ending in thin pointed spikes. Their body was like that of an armored crab. But they had the agility and dexterity of a spider with those long legs. But the real danger to the goat was what stayed on the ceiling. A pale blue light shot from the cavern roof at the doomed goat before it could collapse, illuminating the rock in a blue hue. This glow surrounded the goat, lifting it off its feet with a lurch into the air. There, the animal floated, slowly rotating on itself, hooves flailing around with panic. I could even see the clumps of blood floating around in ball-like orbs, merging together, spinning around aimlessly. The spider automatons moved across the terrain like water streams over rocks, legs a blur. Rushing at impressive speed to reach the goat given their size. Likely to skewer the almost dead victim with those sharp limbs. I hadn't seen any other weapons they could have used. Those spiders didn't get the chance. A loud whistle came from the ceiling, caused by a steel spike shooting through the air. It skewered into the goat before any of the spiders could have their slice. If it hadn't died from that spike, it certainly did after 3 more shots hit it. These came from different directions, catching the trapped animal all across its body. It spun with every hit, its hooves limp. We were next. Father leapt to the side, as a spike impaled the area he'd been sprinting through. More landfalls of the spider-like automatons happened behind us. The full nest was rousing now. I knew what was going to happen next the moment that haze of blue appeared around us, and so did Father. As fast as reflex, he tossed me out of the beam. Run! He yelled, turning on himself and drawing out his rifle to aim upwards, as his feet lifted off the ground. I hit the ground and rolled, a spike impaled itself by my feet and burrowed into the rock a good inch. Message received as intended, I scrambled to my feet, bolting for the tunnel and trying my best to be unpredictable. Whistling spikes fought against the rifle's barking burst of fire for dominance. Whatever was happening, Father was taking hits. I could hear the frizz of the Winterscar armor shields deflecting hits. A lot of hits. Something big cracked on the ceiling followed by a shattering crunch on the ground. I couldn't tell what was going on, my head fixed straight to the tunnel. As I was starting to think I'd get impaled any moment now, a winking of gold caught my eyes. Under a rockway, a smaller metal door flashed at me. Closer to me than the tunnels were. Footfalls were everywhere. Something behind me was catching up. I made a snap choice and changed course for the small door frame. Something shoved my foot down and a moment later, I realized I couldn't tug my foot away. A glance down showed the reason. A spike had punched through my calf muscles and skewered me into the ground. There wasn't any pain, or shock. I grabbed the metal spike and pulled up, but found it firmly impaled into the ground. A metal gauntlet wrapped itself over the spike and pulled the entire thing out of the ground in one fluid motion. Father had made it to me. He hadn't pulled the spike out of my calf, just freed me from the ground. Without a second wasted, he grabbed my collar and lifted me up. I swear I could feel the throw before it even happened. Again, he launched me forward like a toy. Sailing straight, I flew to the glowing gold doors, which were now open. They must have opened up while I'd been fumbling against the spike. I skidded to a quick stop inside the tunnel, on the smooth ground. A glance behind me showed father hadn't been able to follow. Held up fighting off one of those spider-like automatons instead. The thing towered above him. Its body several times his mass, while its legs almost twice as tall as he was. I hadn't noticed details from a distance, but now that it was close I could. First, it didn't have two eyes. Instead it had eyes all around the edges of its dome shell, almost like shellfish would. It looked like a fat frisbee with 6 legs, but far, far more terrifying. And agile like nothing I'd seen before. The machine danced around, striking at father like a surgeon. Each hit, planned out to isolate him away from the door. All its legs moved interchangeably, some to hold it up and others to attack with. It clearly could move those limbs for anything in a pinch. And it moved with twitchy movements that shouldn't be possible for its size. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice over. Fear didn't control me this time, experience or the stimulants had dampened it. I felt whole, lucid, and most importantly, in control. I rolled over to my knee and reached for my pistol. The other spiders caught up and circled around but didn't interrupt the life and death fight going on in front. Whatever was on the ceiling shooting spikes had stopped as well. I wasn't sure if it was out of respect for the duel or that they couldn't get a clear shot with the spider in the way. Father fought back like a cornered animal. In those few seconds I primed my pistol. He hadn't drawn out his knife, the spider kept him too hung up on defense. Even up to the point of having to tank some hits with his damaged armor. Every bit of his focus was on avoiding those impaling limbs. I lined up my shot, considering where the best target point could be. Even if the creature's body wasn't angled to me, it somehow spotted my movements. The machine reacted, lifting 3 of its legs to protect its core in anticipation. It looked like a lopsided tripod now. Rectangular holographic shielding flared to life across its limbs, lighting up the surroundings in pale blue light. It looked like relic armor shielding, the same color and appearance too. Only more permanent. I opened fire, not letting it get a chance to fully close up its legs into one massive shield. The bullets hit the fortified white carapace instead, chipping the ceramic armor, dealing next to no damage, just as the legs locked into place. It lowered one of those legs an inch, a few violet eyes peeking out from between the limbs. The machine looked almost bewildered. As if it had been expecting a hail of bullets or some massive weapon. And couldn't believe such a puny shot was what happened instead. That was a big mistake on its part. Father was not an opponent you could afford to forget about. The man didn't waste the chance, smashing at an exposed leg with a savage kick. He rolled out of the way as the spider lost balance and came crashing forward. Its legs flailed about in the air trying to catch itself as it toppled down. In a split second, it decided to face plant on the ground instead, and use those legs to cover exposed parts. Given the man next to it had a loaded weapon and good reason to use it, that turned out a smart choice. Bullets riddled the shielded legs. Shots sought out any exposed mechanical parts from the sloppy last-second defense. White ceramic plating flew off in dusty chips from the attack. Nothing managed to do more damage than that. The spider's armor held, no longer smooth and polished, but still had plenty of life left. The blue shielding undulated like a wave at the furious impacts, no sign of damage behind. In moments, the window of time to hit something important evaporated. The spider had shored up its defense into something more respectable. With a quick duck to avoid one flying spike, Father turned his rifle up next, giving up on damaging the spider. He aimed at whatever was clinging to the ceiling, backtracking blindly backwards. Firing single-shot hits each time he had lined up a shot. At least those ceiling targets seemed weak to the weapon. Barnacle-like, with one violet eye peeking deep from their center, hooded by the shell. They had no arms or legs, only a turret that tracked after Father. A bulky, more conventional-looking weapon. I could take a guess that those were the ones that shot spikes, and a moment later, was proven right. Their aim was good. But a single eye? That seemed like a major weakness. A weakness I could exploit. I lined up the iron sights on the pistol. A bullet shot out, flying true and breaking the violet glow of one of these. They quickly reacted to my presence, but not before I had fired another 3 shots, which managed to blind a second of these creatures. Spikes hurled down into my tunnel and I avoided them by hugging the sides of the walls, which obscured line of sight. When the spikes stopped raining down, I took a look at the situation. Shots clinked across Father's armor as he continued to backtrack in my direction. He was only able to dodge a handful, even as he saw them coming. But just the same, they couldn't dodge his shots either. And he was doing damage to their population. Like I had done, he was also aiming for their eyes, expertly taking them out with 1 bullet each. I added my own shots into the mix, nailing another 2 as he mowed 6 down with speed. The spider Father had been fighting was still hunched over, covering all its eyes. Its vision seemed blinded in the process. And so, it hadn't noticed Father had stopped attacking it, as he steadily retreated. 7 more spikes hailed down around and into him as his rifle clicked empty. A few missed him, but others hit hard, finally breaking the relic armor's shield reserves. The next spike would probably penetrate his armor if it hit. And he was still only halfway to the door. I continued to open fire, trying to keep the spike throwers switching up targets to me. They seemed at least smart enough to know attacking the target who could duck into cover wasn't going to come with results. The spider peeked through its legs again when it heard the rifle stop shooting. Immediately it screeched bloody murder. Its prey hadn't been attacking it at all, but instead making a run for it. Bamboozled twice now. The angry monster leapt out to chase after him, fury radiating out. 3 more spikes rained down on Father, 2 of which he avoided. The third flew true. But the old man still had cards left to play. The rifle flipped up sideways, he turned it into a makeshift shield. The spike ripped to the other side and remained lodged in the brutalized rifle. It wasn't ever going to be shooting another bullet after that. But Father's armor was spared the hit. He continued to use it as a shield, stopping 2 more spikes in their tracks. The spider had caught up right after. Lucky for us, its size and Father's close distance to the tunnel was obscuring the stationary ceiling automatons. I shifted my aim back at the spider, ready to unload the last 3 shots in my pistol. It wouldn't be much, but maybe I could take one of its eyes down at this distance. The spider still didn't take chances, 2 legs up this time, covering the important parts. Looks like it remembered Father was liable to cripple its stance if it stood on 3 legs. Those energy shields were once more active in anticipation for whatever I had in store. And the other 4 were all used up to keep the spider moving after Father. It was in range to attack, but now found itself with no spare limbs to spear him with, unless it was willing to expose something to my pistol. I could hear its frustration through the screeching coming from the creature. Still, it chased after Father, likely planning something different. Father twisted around and gave his full attention to accelerating into the tunnel. He crossed the tunnel territory in seconds, sliding down the incline right through the doorway. The door sealed shut the instant he'd crossed the line. It snapped viciously down on an outstretched automaton limb trailing inches behind. The machine limb was severed at the midsection, blue energy shield and all, clearly no match for how strong this door was. Pounding could be heard on the other side, followed by angered screeches. But nothing was coming through that door. We'd made it. Chapter 24, Gift of the Sun. The gloom in the tunnel was illuminated only by our suit lights. Father breathed a sigh, collapsing on the side of the tunnel and sliding down to sit. He took a few steadying breaths, getting his energy back. Winterscar looked outright mutilated, dozens of plates ripped into, but otherwise still in one piece. Starting to suspect that relic armor relied a lot more on shields than it did the metal plates. Or that everything down here had already been more specialized at ripping apart metal armor. None of the automatons had any rifles, so far. Knock on metal, that trend followed. A massive thud resounded from the door at our side, doing the knocking for me already. Followed by claw sounds and furious screeches. Our six-legged, no scratch that, our five-legged friend was not at all happy he hadn't been invited past the door like we had been. That said, can they break through the door? Father motioned me over with his working hand, ignoring the sounds, then he sat up to kneel by my leg once I scooted by. No. Nothing is getting through the door, he said in the darkness as he reached for his boot. His knife was drawn out, humming to life in the tunnel, looking like a brief halo as he spun it around his palm in preparation. Another source of light besides our own. Once I oriented my chest light to get a better view at my calf, I could see the steel spike had gone straight through without any resistance. It looked horrible, blood staining the entire weave around the wound. Also wasn't hurting at all. I knew I should have felt something, instead my calf felt stiff and unresponsive, like someone was holding it still. The occult knife was lowered near to the far side of the spike, cutting off the end, leaving the core embedded into my calf. Prepare the field repair kit. I'll pull the rest of the spike, you'll need to seal both exit wounds right after. I stumbled out the backpack, taking out the field repair and medical kits. Sounds and scraping still came from the door, the automaton on the other side hadn't given up yet. It continued to pound against the door, wailing. Father noticed my attention on the barrier. Those spiders are difficult to kill. But they don't have anything more than legs to fight with. They lack the tools or firepower they'd need to break open a might-made door. And they're not strong enough to pry it open either. So you're 100% sure that thing isn't getting in here? I wouldn't be standing around here if I wasn't sure, he said. More banging came from the door. I knocked back. Sorry, occupied. Go bang on another door. There was a pause and then the screeching resumed at a higher octave along with slamming. So they could understand English. Hey buddy, how about we call the whole thing one big misunderstanding and forget all about this? The scratching and screaming told me it wasn't going to forget anytime soon. Father tugged. Don't play around, boy. We gain nothing by taunting the creatures. Yeah, but after all the scrap shit these things put us through, I really want to twist the knife into them. Gallows humor, Kedra would call it. Helps me cope with rat shit luck. Father scoffed, shoving my chest back slightly. Rotten luck? We had great luck when the door shut as it did. Great luck? These doors were calling to us the whole time, I said, elbowing him back. And what do you think a trap looks like, boy? Have you already forgotten about the lever? Don't think a few minor life and death encounters made me forget about the 3 baskets of frostbloom you owe, young man. Did he just crack a joke? Or was he serious? Both. Both. The thing caught me so flat-footed I hardly knew what to say back. Ah, was the only word that came out. Ah, indeed, he sighed, glancing at the sealed door, resting his back against the wall. In this case, you made the best of the options we had. The automaton would have chased us down the tunnels even if we'd managed to run. That was a poor plan on my part. There'd be no escape. And the cover shots with your pistol gave me the opening I needed. He paused for a moment. I would have died without it, Keith. You made the right call. Father giving me a compliment was something that seemed alien. I didn't know how to feel about that, so I got busy instead. There was a metal spike embedded into my calf I had forgotten about. It looked like the spike had only punctured through the muscle at least. The training under my belt was basic when it came to first aid and anatomy. From the angle, it would be a sound guess that the spike hadn't gone through bone, which would have been a nightmare to deal with. Another stroke of great luck there, I'll grudgingly add another point on Father's side. The kit popped open at my side as I took out the glue gun. He grabbed the remaining end, and counted down to 3. Then he yanked the spike out of my calf wholesale. I didn't feel any pain, more like someone had pushed something in my calf from the inside. Blood flowed out almost immediately, and I drowned the hole with a shot of glue at the epicenter. Quickly, I turned my calf around and shot the other side. Couldn't be sure if I had really hit the center of the wound, but the glue was already hardening. I didn't see any more drops of blood leaking out of it. Father glanced over at the work. Good. You'll need to take a pain suppressor from your med kit once the adrenaline wears off. Try not to use your leg, but don't be afraid to sprint if it'll save your life in the short term. Do you understand? I gave him a nod and replaced the field repair gun with another syringe from my kit. Father hadn't set the ruined rifle down on the side of the tunnel, examining it while I'd been tending to my wound. The spikes on the rifle had cut clean through, a mirror to my calf. But better the rifle than the battered armor. It was clear this rifle wasn't going to see another fight. The weapon was an old thing, well worn and used. Unlike relic armor, this was something Father maintained himself. It was with a sense of loss that he hovered over it. Even with the full faceless helmet, it was oddly expressive. Down one of his best weapons. Which meant the occult knife, my pistol, and one grenade were the only things we had left to defend ourselves with down here. I'll need your pistol. No arguments from me, I passed it over without a word. I wasn't particularly attached to guns anyhow. Will the extra size of the grip be an issue? I asked him. Oversized grip won't hinder me too much. It's the limited shots and precision that I'm worried about. A dull pain was starting to come through my leg. A reminder that the adrenaline wasn't going to hang around forever. Better get that painkiller into my system. I pulled out another vial with the right label, preparing it to the dosage. It was silly to consider just how many precious vials I was running through in a matter of hours. Like reserving all your sweets for a whole year only to waste it in one day. But if it got us back home, I was willing to pay any price. And if there was ever a time to use items instead of hoarding them, it would be now. The vial was set and administered with a tiny hiss. Black dust drifted off the Winterscar armor, flowing across down to his hand, where Father held the bloody spike pieces. I saw the dust consume the entire thing, gore and all. Still, the armor remained horribly damaged. He glanced over to the severed automaton limb, before a particularly loud bang against the door caught both our attention. I think it had tried to charge into the door. There was still furious screeching, metal limbs scratching against it. The thing was persistent, I'll give it that. Father didn't seem to mind, instead lifting up the severed machine limb as if in offering. The dust consumed that just as easily as the spike. I saw it slowly disintegrate, bit by bit. Relic armors were good at telling what damage would be critical and what could be survivable hit by hit. So they'd use energy shielding with great efficiency. But Winterscar was seriously towing the line in these fights. I didn't know if it always functioned this way, or if the armor knew exactly how bad of a situation we were in. And was trying its best to stretch out integrity. A massive crack on his chest still remained, parts of the exterior plates knocked right off where the automaton had landed a glancing hit on. For the second time, I got a more detailed look at what existed under these armors. Inside, multiple small separate metallic plates connected to a mess of wires. Each had incredibly intricate glowing images carved into the plates, the same glow as the occult weapons had on their edge. The chest exterior armor made it hard to tell the inscriptions on these smaller plates. The least obstructed was made up of triangles. Massive triangles at first, breaking off into smaller ones. The pattern repeated over and over, growing smaller each time, multiplying in all directions. Other plates also had similar patterns, just different shapes, or designs. I could understand wiring and circuit boards, but why all of these? They looked like solid chunks of metal, with no purpose other than to hold the glyph. Were they signs to point out different sections of the armor? Some sort of language? I discarded those two ideas right out. Why go through all that trouble of carving out such detailed images when a simple label would do? Language couldn't be useful if it took hours to craft one letter. If there was meaning to glean from the visual, then it would have to be simpler. Considering more, the only conclusion that made some amount of sense was a crafter's mark. It could be that each armor had many different forge masters behind its creation. Hence all the different plates inside. But what's with the occult glow? I didn't get much more of a look at the internals, as the armor's spirit regenerated the upper layer of armor on top. It had greedily devoured through the metal offering until there was nothing left to give. Only white ceramic and strands of black wire fell on the ground, leftovers. The automaton limb had been all used up. But the armor hadn't been completely fixed, there were still gashes by the arm and legs. Odd that the armor hadn't consumed the whole limb, leaving parts untouched. Was it a picky eater? He turned to glance at me and I unpacked my backpack, rifling through the contents for anything we could spare. The life support system had already been cannibalized to repair the earlier damage against screamers, once we'd found a place to hide. Whatever was left were more essential tools. Rope, crowbar, and other miscellaneous items that would be needed later on. I looked up and shook my head at him. There wasn't anything inside. He sighed, then turned to look at his rifle. There was a look of almost mourning when he stared down at the busted rifle. Though I could have imagined that. When he reached for it, I had a more obvious idea. Why not cut some of the walls here and use that? Father turned to peer in my direction, contemplating something. Then he shrugged, taking out his knife and cutting off a piece of the wall. Holding it out, the black dust drifted around it, circling, and then retreating back into the armor. The shard of rock he'd cut remained unconsumed. Do you understand? Relic armors have certain materials they don't assimilate, he said, tossing the rock shard on the ground. Most well known of these are other relic armors, anything made by mites, and certain clays. He knocked the walls of the tunnel. This looks like rock, but the entirety was made by mites. Even the dirt under you was made by mites. Natural dirt and earth is likely miles under us, under the final level, if I had to guess. Father reached out to the rifle, mind set. As far as I know, metal is one of the few mite-made materials that could be assimilated, but it has to be melted down first. Organic material can also work in a pinch, but the returns are slim. We'd have to travel and collect plants for some time before the armor could be back to full condition. He glanced down at his old weapon, riddled with those huge spikes. Time I can't assume we'll get. This rifle isn't going to be repaired with the tools we have here. It's dead weight now. He held out the weapon in offering. The black haze swarmed over, reaching the rifle, consuming it. Including the steel spikes that had ended the gun's long-running career. About 2/3 of the way, the black haze retreated back into the relic armor's cracks, satiated. What was left was a rifle-like shape of metal, the interiors exposed and half dissolved. I could see even the clip had been half consumed, showing an empty hollow where the bullets had once been, before he'd run empty in the earlier fight. He tossed the remnants of metal on the floor, looking at it for a moment before turning his headlights back down the dark cramped tunnel. Well, I guess we can keep following the yellow light for now, I said. As if it could hear us, a golden light winked into existence, near the end of our light's range. No question it wanted us to follow. I had no idea where it wanted to lead us, but it saved my life, so it had that going for it. Father grunted, unhappy with the prospect but finding no other alternative. We weren't going back to the spider automaton death trap. Last I counted, that was the only other option right now. I couldn't hear any more noise from that door, but I wasn't about to try to open it. "URS watch over us," Father muttered and took a step down the tunnel, pistol at the ready. We followed an unspoken agreement to trust it for now. On the first few steps I could feel blood had pooled in my boot. Despite the patch I'd administered, a good amount of blood had already soaked my socks before. Felt like I'd submerged my foot in water by accident. Walking was already awkward in an environmental suit. Now with my calf growing stiff and unmovable, it was slowing me down. I didn't ask to be carried and instead tried to put all my attention on keeping a quick pace, limping whenever I could. We were going down an unknown tunnel, following an unknown entity with unknown motives. On the other hand, we were walking away from a known death trap, with a known entity and clear motives to murder us. I'll consider this a lucky upgrade. Another point for father. Underscore 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 un. The first time we encountered a door at the end of a tunnel, it opened as soon as we drew near. Once we slipped past, it closed behind us just as quickly. The process would repeat as we journeyed. Each door would open for us without complaint. Father seemed unnerved by that, but didn't make any more comments, keeping that pistol at the ready the whole time. We didn't run into any danger along the way, blessedly. The gold light had guided us true so far, except that it wasn't leading us closer to the surface. There hadn't been any, if at all, moments where we'd had to climb up. That made me nervous, but since we were exploring a branch tunnel, there were no other lights to guide us. After about an hour of travel, we found ourselves in a dark antechamber. Our headlights surveyed the area, grey stone lit up at each head turn. The golden light had stopped appearing in this cavern, and the only way was forward. A feeling stirred inside me, that we'd reached the destination the light had been leading us to. Deeper inside, I realized this wasn't just a cavern, it was an unplanned crypt. Collapsed on the side of another mite-made wall, lay skeletal corpses of dead humans. Father dropped to his knees at the sight, once his headlights flashed over all three bodies. Then he brought his hand to his chest, pistol and all, in the most reverent praying posture Exodosites knew. Praise be to yours. We actually have a chance now. He whispered in awe. I followed his gaze, finding myself going from horrified to similarly awed. The grinning skulls were all undisturbed and in one piece. The sub-zero temperature must have slowed down the rot. Yet the semi-frozen bodies had still decomposed into the bone-white skeletons. They were ancient. Two of the bodies still had scraps of clothing that I couldn't recognize, color and shape long gone. That wasn't the important part. It was the third dead man that had brought Father to his knees in prayer. This was what the gold light had been leading us for. That last body sat contemplatively against a rock, further away from his two companions in death. Calmly cradling an ancient rifle in his lap. A long sword lay propped next to the body, a simple blade with a decorated cross hilt. And one familiar faceless helmet sat by his other side, skeletal fingers resting upon it. As perfectly intact as the relic armor the man had died wearing. Now a burial gift. Masterless and desolate, waiting all this time in the dark. Waiting, for its next wielder. Chapter 25, Journey. We walked reverently up to the fallen relic knight. My limp couldn't stop me from getting a closer look. The armor had gold ornaments and designs that mirrored a stylized sun. I recognized that sigil. An Imperial Crusader. I whispered out, Father confirming it quietly behind me. There wasn't an actual empire, of course. Imperials were a religion that claimed some empire had existed once, and that they were the proud remnants of that empire. These must have been pilgrims, trying to reach the surface to offer alms to their sun goddess. They must have been separated from the usual convoys. I knelt before the dead crusader. The skull bowed slightly down, its final transient prayer now fixed eternally. I wasn't worthy of wielding relic armor and doubly condemned by scavenging from a god's blessed crusader's corpse. Even we scavengers had some limits we wouldn't cross. Taking anything from imperial pilgrims felt like sacrilege. But relic armor was on a different level. And the crusader hadn't been poor either, an occult long blade leaned at the side, along with what looked to be the hilt of a knife by the boot. Something had led us to this armor for a reason. Survival trumped all. The skull clattered onto the ground when I reached out to touch the armor. A heavy layer of dust was disturbed by the events, floating into the air and lit up by our headlights. Quiet prayers asking forgiveness fell from my mouth in stutters as I carefully removed the plates one at a time. Piece by piece I extracted the ancient gear while father remained on the lookout. Father, I asked something in the back of my mind. Is the armor sentient? More than just a program? I heard the metal clinking of his armor as he shrugged behind me. They all have the same basic AI, so in a manner of speaking they are. Are they smart enough to talk to? Did it guide us here? It's limited, you won't find them to be good conversational partners. Winterscar said nothing more than status reports for as long as I've known the armor. It was built to assist the user and for no other purpose. What? It spent years without talking to you unless you talked to it. They don't form bonds with people. My armor will not care about where I've gone once Kedra inherits it. I will only be another name on a long text file. I guess I'd find out soon enough myself. There was a feeling in my gut that convinced me that this armor had been the one behind the yellow light, searching for a new wielder. I took out a power cell and jettisoned the long-dead one still held by the base of its belt. This was the critical part. Relic armor was said to be indestructible and could endure any test of time. So long as the spirit remained cohesive enough, the armor would always repair itself. But the armor had remained without power for centuries here. With its spirit dormant, damage could have accumulated over time and broken down the delicate soul while it was helpless to regenerate. I prayed in my mind and slotted the power cell with a click. If destiny saw me in this armor, then it would light up. Nothing happened, but I could see the power cell draining out into the systems. I held my breath. It awakened. Lights flicker into life on the inside, the armor alive again despite its long sleep in this tomb. Relief hammered through me, almost making me whoop in joy. The armor was still functional. Of course it would be, in hindsight. People have been finding relic armor for generations now, usually abandoned, and each time they worked. I stripped off my environmental suit as quickly as I could, wincing as the glued parts peeled off my skin. The cold assaulted me immediately, of course, but my movements were efficient and it couldn't break the excitement burning inside me. There were still some parts that the glue were stopping me. I had a high-tech solution to that problem, however. Mind if I use your knife, Father? I need to cut my way out. He nodded and handed it off, hilt first with the usual spin. He hadn't said a word yet, still processing the ramifications of this moment, his arm moving on autopilot. There was no point in being delicate with the suit. It was broken, cut in places already, and the heating system had long since been stripped off. There was no use for any part of this. The dead Crusader's relic armor would be my new home from here on out. In moments, the suit lay in cut strips and my skin was exposed into the cold air. I donned the armor, plate by plate, starting with the powered-up chest. Each piece that connected with the chest hummed quietly with power as I slowly brought the armor back to full working condition. It was slightly taller than I was, with a more spacious chest plate. Motes of dust streamed off the powered plates, warping and consuming sections to expand others. I saw it stream down to the fragments of my old environmental suit, disintegrating parts of that as well. Using the extra fuel to assist in reforming into a more form-fitting version. That screamed intelligence to me. Or at least aware enough to know I had no more use for the ruined environmental suit and that it had no need to ask. With each armor piece, the cold vanished, unable to penetrate past the ancient metal. It felt odd, like a light gust blowing over my skin, under the armor. I could feel the hairs on my arms tingle for a moment before settling back down to normal. Felt oddly refreshed too, like the sweat and grime that had been accumulating were suddenly gone the moment the plate fixed itself over me. The first parts to fully connect were the gauntlets and arms. I moved them around with dexterity, watching as the plates clinked against one another, moving with both grace and power. They could rip things apart with the hidden strength inside and yet they seemed so precise. My hands and arm felt light as a feather, almost as if the armor itself was weightless. There wasn't any empty space, some sort of cushion inflating into the armor's sides and holding it snug against my skin. From the moment I'd hooked enough of the leg pieces I could tell that moving around was a completely different experience. Even my calf wound stopped holding me back. Mostly armored now, I reached down and plucked the occult longsword, staring at it. A simple double-sided blade, with an ornate hilt. A few experimental swings in the air reinforced the feeling that something was different in how this armor moved compared to my environmental suit. I realized why after a few more test swings. The armor was moving my legs and arms for me. It followed my actions, like a second set of muscles. Power coursed through, and it made sense now how relic wielders could move so swiftly. Or rip apart metal with their hands. They weren't the ones moving the armor moved them. I felt like I had hundreds of questions, but most I could figure out on my own. There was a single one that I couldn't quite guess it. How does? I asked a little timidly, how does the waste work? There hadn't been a waste removal system like the environmental suits had, as far as I'd seen. Father tilted his head slightly. Out of everything you could ask, this is what you wish to know first? Scholars have rotted your brain, boy. The armor's spirit consumes organic matter. Added together. Ah. So that means, if you have to go, you go. It will keep you clean. Sweat, blood, and even tears are consumed by the armor. I nodded and turned back to the last bit of armor left to don. The ornate faceless visor started back, held in my new armored gauntlets. Waiting for me to equip it. I let the hilt of the sword go, leaving the occult weapon on the side of the rock it had spent centuries on. Both hands free now, I brought up the relic armor helmet. I'd never thought I'd wear one of these in my entire life. And now, there will be a relic armor whose legacy in the clan would start with me. House Winterscar was a knight retainer caste, but I'd never really identified with that title. Frankly, if I could find a way to disown the Winterscar name, I would have done so a long time ago. Instead, I felt like I'd be the first engineer to don one of these armored suits. The helmet rose up and settled down snugly over my head. The interior was dark at first, but turned fully transparent not even a second after, letting me see a view of everything around. As if no helmet existed at all. My vision was filled with orange lines and text that the armor displayed another half-second after, layering the world in details. This must be the heads-up display. There was a pressurized hiss as the chest neck piece connected with the helmet, and the last of the cold was chased out. The suit was sealed, supplying me with air through some other means. Something puffy inflated and I felt padding lock around my face and cheeks, same as it had been everywhere else on my body. The helmet was now completely snug, no gap of air anywhere except for my face. That tingle of air swept past my cheeks and nose, ridding me of the grime on my skin. I saw a haze of grey on the sides of my vision as the sub-armor wind passed by. Thinking it through, that must be the armor's spirit, keeping me clean. New user detected. Identify. An ethereal voice sounded in my ears. This must be the armor. Despite being forewarned, the voice still caught me by surprise. It sounded so eloquent. I am Keith Winterscar, pleased to meet you. I responded back into my helmet, hoping I was doing this right. Registering new user, Winterscar, Keith. Combat suit integrity nominal. Looks like I'd done the right steps so far. What's your name, armor? Last registered designation, Journey. A very imperial name. They always named things after goals or titles. Victory, divinity, endurance, sanctity, etc. etc. Grand-sounding labels like that. In comparison, we Exodosites had a simpler tradition on naming. Thankfully I didn't need to rename this armor after my family house name, since father's armor was the prime relic armor. All other armors brought in after into the house, well, that was up to the new owner's decision. Not that I planned to rename it, I certainly wasn't going to bring that bad luck on myself. Nope, its last owner had been an Imperial Crusader. I certainly wasn't going to dishonor the previous owner's choice in name. Pilfering from an imperial already lent to an uneasy feeling. All right, journey it is. Please keep me safe in these dangerous times. Acknowledged. The suit answered back emotionlessly. Even with its indifferent answers, there was still a thrill in knowing this suit of armor was now mine, and I was talking to it. My old environmental suit's backpack easily fit over my shoulders, and I was awed at how light it felt now. Or its lack of weight. Don't get overconfident. Father said, his voice already synced into my helmet's speaker. New knights always feel they can defeat the world. I've never seen any of them be right. My survival chances had shot up through the roof, but I could still find myself buried in the snow if I wasn't cautious. I nodded at him, and he continued. Knights need to go through extensive training to make use of an armor's full capabilities. Weeks, or months if need be. He said. We don't have that time to spare. I'll teach you the basics, and that will have to do for now. What's the first step? The user interface. You can select things by looking at them and blinking twice. Or just call up the name with your voice. I responded affirmatively, and then tried it out. The heads-up display was filled with different bits of information. One of them caught my eye. The word biometrics floating off to the far left. Looking directly at it, I blinked twice. A full three-dimensional hologram of my body appeared projected onto the helmet. It rotated around, highlighting in red my wounded calf. Statistics and details appeared on the side when I glanced at each, showing exactly what was wrong. Apparently that calf wound was going to be a problem unless I got treatment for it, according to the warnings the armor was shoving into my face. It wasn't fatal, but it could be crippling if not properly cared for. Once I looked away and blinked, the page was closed automatically. I started exploring the other options from the interface, making a shallow check of all the possible items I could work with. There were other stats, including historical data. And a realization that the last wearer had been a woman named Cathita, not a man like I'd originally thought. Given the pose they had all died in, it seemed like they hadn't died in a fight, but rather lack of resources or exposure. Death must have been anticipated. A few logs also remained of her final days from what the armor showed, and as much as I wanted to dive into the history behind this relic armor and find out what they were doing here, I was on a time limit. Those logs weren't going anywhere, but the rescue party certainly was. The helmet color corrected everything I looked at in the cavern, making it easier to identify items or see items in the distance. Those orange lines and highlights pointed out things I had missed, such as equipment the other two skeleton pilgrims had, outlined on the bodies. One of which was marked as Priority 1. Well, that was ominous. Has the armor told you its name? Father asked, breaking my focus. The relic armor's name is Journey. A good name for an old crusader's armor. We'll run a set of exercises to get you up to speed, and then we need to continue forward. I would celebrate for a day straight, were these different times. But I hadn't been listening. Instead my gaze was fixed on what I'd just seen a moment ago. Journey had synced with Father's armor, Winterscar. And the family armor had sent back a biometric report of Father's current status. His full skeleton, bones and all, were outlined and superimposed over his biometrics. I saw all the fractures, the broken mismatched seams. And more importantly, what wasn't there? His arm hadn't been broken. It was completely missing. Chapter 26, Root Administrator. Father, I stared at the three-dimensional skeleton of his vitals. The entire left arm, almost to his shoulder blade, had been cut clean off. The vitals unhelpfully stated permanent damage but showed the skin was cleanly cauterized. What happened to your arm? He shrugged, as if it were nothing. I told you already, boy. It's broken. No. Winterscar shows me it's outright missing. You're lying to me. That gave him pause. He muttered something about the armor, then sighed. Fine. If you need to know, I had to deal with machines while you were unconscious. One of these encounters didn't end in my favor. A drake cut through the relic armor and my arm with it. The armor could be repaired eventually. There wasn't anything I could do for my actual arm. The explanation made sense, but given his track record of avoidance, I couldn't be sure that was the real truth. I didn't understand why he was keeping so many things from me. What was he gaining from doing that? Regardless, however he lost his arm, it was missing and cauterized. That fact was indisputable. I didn't need to guess at the rest of the issues he faced. The sheer amount of warning and internal injuries Journey pointed out on Father's vitals told the rest of the story. Skull fractures, broken ribs, muscle contusions, subconjunctival hemorrhage on the left eye, it went on and on. The relic armor was even predicting time until total organ failure, down to a matter of days, neatly written in a counting timer on the side. Stimulants, painkillers, and Winterscar itself were the only things keeping him walking and lucid right now. We've got to get you back on the surface, maybe we can still fix some of this, I stuttered out, waving vaguely at, well, everything. He shook his head slowly at that. No, Keith. This will be my last mission as a relic knight, and the last time I wear my armor. When I return to the surface, I'll be an invalid for the rest of my days with a crutch if I'm lucky. A wheelchair is more likely. Journey has already summed this up for you, hasn't it? Shock flooded through me, realizing the gravity of the situation. Journey was indeed already writing out a detailed report over the heads-up screen, pointing out where the long-term damage would come from. But, what'll happen to you? It was a stupid question in hindsight. I'll retire. He shrugged, as if it didn't bother him. Kedra will inherit Winterscar and I'll find another way to serve the clan. I can mentor trainees, help the next generation learn to survive. I'm more than my combat expertise. I still have something to offer. I'm not yet worthless. He looked to the side as he spoke and a feeling of loss dug down in my guts. Still, he shook me out of it with his next words. We need to survive first before we can worry about what happens after. He said. Do you understand, boy? Survival first. Everything else can come later. Put these thoughts aside for now and focus. I need to get you up to speed on how to make use of the relic armor while I still can. I nodded, my swollen calf felt like such a minor wound in comparison now. A few steady breaths and I put everything I could into the back of my mind. There's a plan here, I just need to do my part in this. Father's condition, we can consider it once we're closer to the surface, when it's possible to even start tackling it. All right, what are the first drills I should do to get myself familiar with relic armor? His voice seemed almost thankful I had dropped the subject. First, we'll have you test the range of motion in your arms and legs. Watch how I move. Underscore 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 un. Father talked me through a set of katas and drills meant to showcase the full range of mobility. We went through the abridged version without issue in an hour. While I couldn't land all the physical moves the armor was capable of, I was doing much better with the suit's more technical abilities. Navigating through the options menus, settings, and other administration was second nature to me, which apparently hadn't been the case for anyone else Father had trained before, including himself. He went quiet after I'd started exploring deeper into the suit's interface, letting me find out more. Testing how it moved with different settings. You seem relaxed about this, I said, in between the silence. He'd been sitting down, cleaning off the ancient longsword the Imperial Crusader had once owned. We'd already agreed that it would serve best in his hands while I took on the rifle. Father was an expert with multiple fighting styles, and while the Kialor longsword and dagger combo wasn't feasible right now, he was certainly no slouch with the more straightforward Hyjaralef one-handed style. Frankly, I don't think there was a combat style he wasn't an expert with. Father just understood instinctively how to fight. Relaxed about? He asked. Your situation. There was a pause as he likely considered his words. I've been prepared for something like this for some time now, Keith. I only needed to make sure you learned how to take care of yourself first. I wouldn't be able to face your mother if I didn't, I knew that deep down in my gut. Now that you have relic armor of your own, things have changed. He paused, then glanced up, away from the sword. I couldn't tell what expression he made under that helmet, not even Journey's sensors would show that. You know what, boy? I think I'll try to learn something else. Something other than fighting. A dark chuckle came from him, the first time I'd heard him laugh. Perhaps I'll learn how to scribble numbers in the dirt. You seem fond of it. I only need one hand to hold a stick after all. Are you serious about that? Or just kicking the ice till it melts? Serious. He grunted out. I have time, more time than I will know what to do with. I'll need distractions. Man is not built to continue without a purpose. I'd be happy to teach you. I know you would be, boy. I know you would be. He stayed quiet again, inspecting the blade further. Then, he looked up sharply, as if he'd remembered something. Your boot has a knife. Draw it out. You've probably already memorized the suit interface. It's time I taught you some quick techniques with the occult weapons. You'll need to know how to use these weapons. And this will be the last time I can teach you by example. The Crusader didn't just have a long sword, she'd also had a knife. Strapped right to her boot, same as father's. How rich was she? I muttered, extending the weapon out of its sheath. Reserve knives are almost always paired with armors. They come up in combat as often as rifles are used. Too many enemies are immune to conventional bullet fire, especially in the lower levels. This Crusader, Cathita, she likely kept it in reserve, in case her long sword was indisposed. Our situation is different, you'll need to be able to use that weapon standalone. Now draw it out. Kedra had let me investigate her knife before. I'd learned precious little I hadn't already heard stories about. I'd confirmed myself that these weapons had electricity that ran through them, working as a trigger to activate the blade. It didn't need much, so we theorized the current acted more like a real on-off switch than an actual power source. The actual blade was basically just a chunk of metal, enchanted by a warlock, where the knife edge would glow when triggered. That part was up to anyone's guess because it certainly made no sense to me, and I'd tried quite a lot of tests to figure out what its secrets were. It was all futile, of course, I knew that from the start. If I could find out the secrets to creating occult weapons, the warlocks would have been out of business a long time ago. For this knife, it must have been centuries since it was last used. Could it light up again? Or would the power source inside have dried up? The armor needed a refuel to work, I wasn't sure if the knife needed some maintenance of its own. With a shrug, I clicked the trigger. The blade lit up with the traditional blue glow I'd come to associate with the occult. Can't believe it still works. Except, I could if I thought about it more. Backup generators could be preserved indefinitely. The only drawback was inefficiency. The blade itself didn't need a strong source of power, so it makes sense if the hilt had been built with that style of power storage, there was no need for efficiency here. All occult weapons were probably made like this. Fighting with occult weapons as a relic knight is different. Father said from the side, standing back up. These weapons can cut through anything except another occult weapon or a shield. Power isn't a requirement, speed is. You want to leverage the relic armor's legs and arms to strike as quickly as you can. If you do it right, the armor itself will carry through the rest. Start with a standard high-jar stance. I'll show you why the all-F variant is used exclusively by relic knights. Following his orders, I performed a series of training katas and lunges with the dagger. It felt like I could go faster than possible with my actual body, but I couldn't tell exactly how to pull out that extra bit of speed, even with his coaching. The Aleph variant made more use of the body as a whole to shield against attacks. It made more sense now that I was in my own armor, the entire suit was shielded. Using a hand to block an incoming attack wasn't asking to get your hand mangled, but perfectly viable defense. I continued through the motions, many of the strikes being used more to drill down the range of motion my armor could have. Most of the work in training had already been done a few years ago, the variants were easy enough to incorporate. Feels just like old times. I had done, average I suppose. Kedra had learned like a sponge, her skills with knives and long swords were more in the league that father was. Mine, not so much. I regret not having been a better teacher. Father said. Each training session, I was failing you further. Don't think it's you that did the failing. I just don't have that natural talent you and Kedra have. I wasn't bad. I said, thoughts of past fights with some of my peers proved I had at least picked up enough to hold my ground. Just not great. I give myself even odds of fighting off a pipe weasel, so long as it's smaller than my hand and doesn't look at me funny. You misunderstand. He stood, drawing out his own knife and walked to my side. I mirrored his stance. He struck forward a quick lunge and I followed it. We moved together for the next set of movements, familiar to me though drills and practice. I know I'm not much of a father. And don't insult me by denying that, boy. He cut me off quickly before I could say anything. The only thing within my skills that I could do for you and Kedra, was to teach you how to fight. At least that one thing, I thought I could do. It's all I was ever good at. Strike, block, turn, strike. I followed the kata, trying to move as quickly and precisely as I could. Even with relic armor, I could tell my father was still moving only half as fast as he could, slowing himself down for my sake. Normally, there would start to be anger at this point. But instead, he continued to talk. It wasn't anger in his voice, it was something different. More like melancholy. Each lesson that I failed to teach you, it made me feel like the one thing that I could do right, the one thing I'm supposed to be able to do right, I couldn't. I grew angry, frustrated at myself, and then I'd take it out on you. We struck out with one last strike, twisting around an imaginary hit and lunging forward to complete the kata. I stayed quiet, not wanting to interrupt him. You weren't the one failing, Keith. The more I gave it thought, the more I realized Kedra is like me. She simply understood. I didn't need to explain anything to her, I only needed to show by example. I was blaming you for something you couldn't possibly overcome. He turned to watch me. You don't learn like she does. Showing you isn't enough. You need to understand through answers, isn't that right? Through words and experiments. Trial and error. You never take anything for granted until you can put it personally to the test. I can't explain to you why stance is important, or why you need to strike at certain angles. Cadence, tempo, spacing, instinct. It's all too complicated and I'm no scholar with sharp enough words for the task. You might be overthinking it, father. I said. Occam's razor, it's a proverb that's often quoted among the reachers, sometimes the simplest answers are the real ones, I'm just not good at fighting. I said. I don't think I could be any better than I am right now. At that he shook his head. No, you can be. You could do so much more than I can. I know that in my gut. I can't explain it to you why, or understand it myself. But I know you could be a great warrior. If you applied that intellect and combined it with. I should have learned how to teach first. And now look at you, you believe you can't fight well. I've crippled you, boy. He reset his stance, and I followed. We continued with another set of strikes, no words between us. He only spoke at the end of the form. I suppose I won't have a choice but to learn how to teach a different way once we're back on the surface. Perhaps there is still some good to come out of all this. He gave another chuckle, this time it held more life to it. I'll need to be able to explain with words. The Reachers were able to teach you. They could talk to you in ways you could understand. If I learned from them, I could try to teach you again. And succeed this time. He motioned me to lift up my knife again, then took a different stance to my side. Once more I stood nearby and mimicked the position. I could introduce you to some of the engineers I know, I said, an REINT coming to mind right away. You might think they're low caste, but they can all be charming. I'm sure they'll grow on you. I never thought they were beneath me, Keith. He paused. You need to understand, I see them as fragile, in need of shelter. I've lived a life where I've been tasked to protect people like them. And I needed you to be the opposite of fragile. Then he shook his head. It doesn't matter anymore now that you have armor. Let's get back to the drills. This much, I can do right. I believed him. Underscore 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 un. The training brought an interesting discovery. The suit wasn't just powering my movements or moving like a second skin, it was actively predicting how and where I wanted to move through some sort of connection with my brain or predictive data. Or something in that nature. When I'd asked my armor, it had simply said it was generating solutions through predictive modeling based on a massive data set of previous human motions. I don't think it understood how it functioned, only that it did. This wasn't actually a suit of combat armor, it was a vehicle, tailored to fit the human frame. And I was controlling it all with my mind more or less. Which made me curious about Father's particular circumstances. Relic armor was so intelligent, I wouldn't be surprised if it could practically move on its own if needed. Which brought on one glaring question, Journey, why isn't Father's armor moving his left hand for him? Hardwired security measures prevent autonomous locomotion. It said. What? Why is that a security issue? Hostile force may attack the combat suit cybernetically and override the unit's locomotion. All features that require autonomous locomotion are locked, requiring both physical user confirmation and administrator permission, or root administrator permissions. Local administrator permissions are waived only if no local users are active. I couldn't even fathom what sort of weapon could hijack relic armor, but I suppose it could exist out there. The thought of being trapped in your own armor was pretty claustrophobic. Father stood up from his seated position. We'd been taking a breather in the meantime. What are you asking about, boy? Relic armor is too smart. I said. It moves itself and is constantly predicting your motions. If it can do that, then what's stopping your armor from moving your left hand for you? My arm is missing, he scoffed. Winterscar wouldn't be able to tell how I wanted to move a missing arm. But that's the thing. Your arm is muscles and nerves, how you choose to move the arm comes from your head, not your arms. So I need to find out if the suit really does have sensors all over to detect muscle movements, or if it's all in the helmet. Or if it really is just predicting things within nanoseconds. And the first step to finding that out is to figure out this safety lock. Journey, is Father the current administrator of his armor? Negative. Ah. That'd have been too easy. Okay, who is? No data found. I could understand Father not being an administrator, but no way to find out who was? Why can't you find anything about the administrator? Another security measure. No administrator set. So, what, you're still running factory settings? Affirmative. Well, worth a shot. I'd like to upgrade my permissions to an administrator account, please. Root administrator override required. Please log into an administrator account with required permissions for this action. No free meals for the hungry. The old chicken and egg situation where to become an administrator you needed an already existing administrator to confirm. Which begs the question, who's the first administrator? I'd seen this problem explained exactly once in my life, from my source of all things interesting, books I'd bought. One of these traders had shown up with a pilgrimage and brought with him a bundle of books on Wi-Fi and old third-era tech. I bought the whole set thinking I'd crack the puzzle. No prize for guessing how that ended. Those books weren't exactly light reading, and also not quite all engineering books either. One of them wasn't even a book, but an instruction manual for a router. And I'd found out the last section of the bundle had been a legal document, some 30 pages dedicated to ownership of a single bit of Wi-Fi software. People from the past eras were nutcases with too much free time on their hands. The vendor had padded the books out with that in hopes gullible people like me didn't have the time to spot it before buying. It had worked, but in my defense I was still a tiny kid back then. Nonetheless, these books had been mostly worthless. There was a reason a random trader had those for sale, and back then I hadn't understood that real information wouldn't be for sale in the first place. But I did find out something interesting about security. Right now the common tech is mechanical, so there's little need for administrators or permission shenanigans. My old environmental suit and pistol don't have any users or passwords to deal with, for example. But apparently in the late Third Era, almost everything could talk to one another, which led to issues. So how do you set the first administrator account if you need an administrator account to confirm the permissions? Ironically, it was that instruction booklet for routers that mentioned the answer. Everything made had a default administrator account and password burned inside the hardware. One that was supposed to be accessed by its first user and changed immediately after. The password was usually the same as the username and very short. The booklet had made it seem like this was just common practice that everyone knew about. I'd get no better guesses, so it's time to put obscure trivia to the test. Journey, I'd like to log in. Username, admin password, administration. Incorrect login. 2 attempts remaining. Journey replied immediately. The tone remained completely colorless, yet I could swear it almost felt patronizing anyhow. As if the armor had figuratively rolled its eyes at me. Welp. Here I thought I'd been so clever. Only 2 more chances to get it right. The Third Era was a few centuries before the godly lost tech era of these armors, but everything was built on top of everything else. So my theory is that somewhere buried deep are the building blocks that the Third Era left behind. If the way to handle administrator default settings had worked without issues back then, I don't see why they'd change that up later. How often were these things updated anyhow? Still, better be sure I wasn't going to mess something up. Journey, what happens if I fail the last 2 attempts? User will be locked out of login attempts for the next 24 hours. Okay, not that bad. If I survived all this, of course, I'd be able to spend time back home, and go through all the books I had to make a more educated guess at this. Got a user manual by chance? If Journey had one, I might be able to find the keys to the kingdom. Would be a cheeky win if it worked. This whole plan did come from a Wi-Fi manual after all. Data not found. I tut, annoyed but not surprised. I'll burn through the low-hanging fruits right now just in case one works. Better to have tried. If I find out I'd been sitting on the right answer the whole time and not used it out of misguided fear, I think I'd die of shame. Admin was the one that the router manual had pointed out, but there were mentions on others. I gave them a shot. Root. Incorrect login. 1 attempt remaining. User, password. Incorrect login. System locked. Rat shit. They had changed it up since the Third Era. No great loss, I hadn't seriously expected that to work. I didn't have any other clues on hand with what I had here. I metaphorically shrugged my shoulders and grabbed my knife, preparing for the next set of training drills. This can be revisited later. Well, can't blame me for tryin'. Root administrator remote override accepted. Guest user, Winterscar, Keith, upgraded to administrator account. Chapter 27, Predictive Modeling. I did it. Wait, how did I do it? I ran out of password attempts. I'm an administrator now. Affirmative. Journey answered, voice still monotone. Father spoke up, what are you talking about? I'm getting more control over Journey, funny enough it worked completely out of my control. I've unlocked something, though I'm not quite sure how. That seemed to make him worried, for good reason. He stood and walked over. Unlocked what? Administrator rights. And what does that mean? It means a lot. But most importantly, there might be a way to fix your arm. This all raised some serious questions I had to solve, and I didn't mean getting an arm to move. Except, right now, we had to get to the surface. And the best way to do that was to get Father's left arm back into working condition. Here goes nothing, Journey, ask Winterscar to move Father's left hand for him. No idea if that was the right way to request things from relic armor. My guess was that the suit would know what I'm after, they seemed more like butlers and servants. Current administrator for combat suit call sign, Winterscar, cannot be reached. Can't be reached because there isn't one yet by any chance. Unknown. Okay. The question is if my luck would hold twice, because guessing random passwords clearly hadn't been what did the trick. But it might have put me on the map to something or someone else. Would it work for him? Or was the root administrator that helped me out just now only able to do that for Journey? Father, repeat this word for word to your suit. Winterscar, upgrade my account to administrator. And when it asks for a username and password, say user, password. For a moment I thought he was about to rebuke me for wasting time again. Instead he nodded and followed directions without complaint. Once done, he turned back to me curiously. It told me my account was upgraded to an administrator. Ho ho ho, we are cooking with fire now. The override for Journey came from a root administrator, and was considered remote, that means the real administrator was at a distance. It's possible it was notified of my attempts to brute force the armor on failure, and when it looked into my situation, decided to throw me a bone. Given that Winterscar requested the same, and likely failed to unlock administrator the exact same way as well, my theory is that Winterscar also sent out a ping just like Journey had. To the same root administrator, who already had decided to help out. Ergo, that would explain why Father only tried to unlock it once while I had to go through all failures. More troubling, this root administrator had the permissions to 2 different relic armors, one of which had been sitting in a cave for the past few centuries. So they probably had access to all the relic armors, or a huge chunk of them. There's 5 possibilities I could think of that would live that long: a deathless, a group of people passing down knowledge, a machine of some kind, the creator of the relic armors themselves, or the armors acting on their own, possibly bending their own programming logic in order to help us out the most. A group of people would certainly try to get leverage from us in some way first, there are no free meals. Additionally, if there were more than one person who knew about administrator accounts and how to unlock them, I'd have heard rumors by now. You can't keep simple information like that secret for centuries. Complicated information was one thing, but something simple to tell over a few sentences and a drink would inevitably leak. That left a machine, the Forge Master, or the armors themselves. The machine theory could be tossed out, because they'd never help a human like so. These armors hadn't come from nowhere, someone had made them. And given there weren't many differences between them all, the armors might have been all forged around the same time. Whoever created these armors might have some kind of immortality like the deathless do. I can't rule that theory out, but I certainly can't prove any of it either, it's all wild speculation based on gut hunches after all. The armors themselves might have tried looking for wiggle room in their programming to assist us in more creative ways. Except that this theory could be disproven easily: if the armors were that altruistic, more people would have unlocked the administrator accounts already. If Journey tossed me the keys when it just met me, that means it's primed to do the same for any other human. I can't have been the first person to poke my nose into this. Although, Father isn't tech literate, and he would not know what administrator account means aside from the literal definition of administrator. He'd spent his focus on what he excelled at, tech stuff wasn't his theater. I knew only soldiers like him would wear these armors and they wouldn't see much downtime for an engineer to sniff around. The problem with all this is that even if I really had been the first engineer with access to one of these relic armors, the Undersiders had more armors than we did. It only took one city that allowed engineers to either wear or simply maintain the armor for this secret to leak out. They'd surely have also discovered the administrator accounts at some point, and the pilgrims would have carried that knowledge up eventually. A deathless is currently the most possible solution as far as I could tell. It wasn't a perfect fit and had its own holes, but at this point I was now either wrong on all 5 guesses or there was information I didn't know yet that affects the options. Focus on the task at hand first. I could come up with more answers later. Turning my head around, I glanced at Father. Ask Winterscar to move your hand for you, see what happens. There was a hesitation in his stance, but he quickly moved past it and asked the suit to move his hand. Things went quiet again. Winterscar must be saying something to him. I couldn't overhear what it was saying, but Father replied, "Confirm override." Excitement followed behind as we both waited with bated breath to see what happens next. Nothing. The arm stayed limp. "Keith," Father said, I'm not sure what the armor is asking me now. Translate for me. More troubleshooting? All right. Journey, I said, can you patch me into Father's armor? A similar but deeper ethereal voice answered instead of Journey. Connection established. Voice pitch modified to identify combat suits vocally. So, you must be our house armor, Winterscar then, right? Affirmative. I felt a small bit of goosebumps speaking to the Winterscar armor itself. Despite the amount of times I'd seen it, the armor was still an outright legendary relic handed down in our house for generations. Pleased to meet you for the first time. It didn't answer back to that. These suits really weren't much for small talk. Father had hit the target when he said they didn't befriend anyone. All right, let's get to the real meat. Winterscar, can you repeat what you asked Father? Please select between motion options, an autonomous combat sub-program or predictive modeling based on 120,449 hours of logged operational use for user, Winterscar, 10 cent. Holy rat shit, that was a lot of hours. Which would be better? Option 2 is estimated to be more effective. Enough data logged to make simulation accurate to 99.9986%. An additional 16.7% power draw is estimated for single-arm simulation. If this was what I thought it was. The way these suits moved was far too eerie and accurate. And Journey had only known me for less than an hour. So what could they do after spending a full lifetime of watching? The amount of hours Father had spent inside that armor was mind-boggling, but it made sense if accounting for the years of daily use. Please select option 2, Winterscar. Remote override rejected. Insufficient permissions. Root level permissions or administrator and user permissions required for remote override. Winterscar chimed out. What THO? Had to be actually wearing the suit before it would take any orders. I couldn't control Winterscar remotely. Made sense. Even with the new administrator account, the suit wanted confirmation from the current user as well. I wondered if that same safety feature prevented our elusive patron from messing with the suits while we were inside them. It most certainly prevented the enemy from messing with us if our own friend couldn't. I turned to Father, ask it for the predictive option. I think the suit can only take that sort of order from you. He still seemed mostly confused on what was going on, but shrugged and asked Winterscar for the second option. As soon as he had said his order, the armor responded. Releasing safety locks. Loading predictive modeling. Isolating model to left brachium. Partial cognitive engram, online. A beat passed. Winterscar said nothing else. Is it done? I asked the armor. Affirmative. Partial cognitive engram is currently online and functioning within nominal range. While that was great to hear, Father's arm still wasn't moving. Ah, scrap shit. What was wrong this time? Father turned his gaze to me, an almost confused look to his posture. Is there another step to take? He asked, moving his arms in a minor shrug. Moving both arms. He seemed to realize this at the same time I did. Immediately, his left arm raised up and his head snapped down to observe. The hand flexed its fingers, open and closing, twisting the wrists while Father gazed down at it, enchanted. How is this possible? Father asked, lifting the whole arm up, amazed as the hand continued to move. I know it's not my arm, I can't feel anything, and yet it moves as if it could read my thoughts. As if it was my own. The left arm continued to wave and move, fingers opening and closing as he gazed in awe. He kneeled down and drew out his boots knife, spinning it around in his hand, and then tossed it to his left. The left hand snatched the midair hilt of the knife, as if natural. Right hand free, he reached out for the occult longsword. Then he stood up into a full Kialor stance. The result looked like the man had nothing wrong, both arms working in perfect sync with one another. He swung a few experimental moves, testing the waters. The strikes flew fast, growing more complex with each second. They flowed into each other like water woven into a stream. He mixed in ducks, feints, twirls and even weapon swaps. The ghost limb acted without flaw, matching his movements perfectly. Both the weapons lit up as he moved, surrounding him in an afterglow of blue following the path his weapons took. He looked less like a man and more a force of nature, a whirlwind of glowing azure made manifest. I'd seen him once move like this. When he fought and reclaimed his title as Lord Atias's right hand. His flow of moves ended with a full body twist, extending his left hand at the optimal moment to throw his knife directly ahead, where the blade sank into the rock wall down to the hilt, aimed perfectly level to his arm. He turned to me, chest breathing in and out quickly at the excursion. This is amazing. Keith. My arm is back. Look. It's even moving when I speak. It had indeed been moving exactly like anyone would unconsciously move their hands. Father jogged forward to recover the knife, then sheathed the weapons. Next, he balled up his right fist and brought it down to the palm of his left hand. It had moved perfectly up to catch the fist. He pushed against it and the hand let itself be pushed slightly back. Then it overpowered his fist back. He continued this tug of war, alternating speed and power. It feels like my left arm is still there, only numb. But it moves like it's connected to my mind. How is this possible? Predictive modeling, from what I can guess, I answered back. It's a long story, but basically Winterscar has spent so many hours watching how you move and think, it can predict what you do next. That's why it's got predictive in the title. And a model is a more technical term to say something like an engine, in this case. Father nodded, still in awe over the moving arm. He began a series of katas like I had been doing, testing how reliable the arm really was. It was night and day different to my own outright clumsy attempts at those same katas. This was how it was truly supposed to look like. I joined in with him again, and we went through the katas together. It was downright eerie how well the arm moved. Since I couldn't see the inside of the arm, it simply looked like my father was moving normally. I'd done good. I'd definitely done good. Underscore 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 un. The next item on the to-do list was the other weapon the Crusader had left behind. My scrapper gun had a massive handle which made it usable for my environmental suit but more than awkward for my new relic armor. Fortunately, Kathita had owned a rifle as well, and it had been cradled in her lap before I'd donned her armor. The ancient rifle left by the dead Crusader was a lot more straightforward to work with, no permission issues here. I wasn't surprised to find its ammunition was different from the scavenger pistol we currently have. I'd have to make do with the clips left over on the Crusader's belt. The design of the weapons hadn't changed, however. Ammunition clip into the rifle, lock and load, press trigger to shoot. Preferably while aiming at something disreputable. Different era, same humans. Don't fix what's not broken and all that. I found where all the bells and whistles were, went through the motions and took an experimental aim. Nothing happened when I pressed the trigger. Rats. The weapon's been too damaged by time. They don't need to be well maintained, but some maintenance is still needed. Father spoke from the side, making his way to my partially dissolved and ripped apart environmental suit. You'll have to make do with your scoff pistol for now. I looked down on the ancient weapon with an odd sense of loss. And then frustration. The relic armor could disintegrate metals and organic matter to rebuild itself from thin air. This raw power that could just magic things out of thin air was literally centimeters away from the broken weapon. Could it really just be restricted to itself? Journey, is there any way you can fix the rifle? I asked. Scanning, corrosion detected. Possible to disintegrate corrosion. Please keep the weapon near the armor. I brought the old weapon by my chest, and the familiar haze of black particles streamed from my suit and flowed down into the rifle. There, they slipped inside. The process took only a minute before the particles streamed back out. Repair complete. Journey chimed in my helmet. I primed the weapon once more, took aim and pressed the trigger. The weapon worked exactly as expected, bullets barking out, straight and true. Father quirked his head to the side. I hadn't thought to ask Winterscar to assist in maintaining my own rifle. That's a novel use of the armor. Calibrating targeting reticle. The relic armor spoke, and then a more pronounced orange circle with tick marks appeared. It moved as I moved my aim. I can't believe Undersiders have hundreds of these, I breathed out. The sheer amount of things relic armor can do, scraping bent metal pricks keeping us in the dark. They had to know about all this. Wait. Did they? Journey still had the default settings, no administrator accounts set up. The same as Father's suit. I could understand Winterscar might be untested, it had spent most of its life up on the surface as far as our history went for it. But Journey? That was an armor owned by Undersiders, a Crusader even. If her armor still had the default settings enabled, then maybe the Undersiders also didn't know about the accounts? Or the root administrator didn't hand out the keys like candy. How the scrap are they supposed to have been using hundreds of these armors? They'd have to have figured out a way to create more. To create more. Oh, I'm such an idiot. I'd seen the armor repair itself from nothing but scrap and power cells. I should have thought of this immediately. Journey, can you create another armor? Negative. The suit replied, dashing my hopes instantly again. That really would have been a bit too broken. But again, I'm not out of the running just yet. I've wiggled out a few wins already from Journey, let's dig into this. It's pretty clear the armor doesn't do anything creatively on its own. Why can't you make another suit? Grey Goo Protocol prohibits the creation of non-colony nanites. I have no idea what any of that meant. Specify query. Journey chimed back. Okay, first, what's Grey Goo Protocol? A protocol set in place to prevent a hypothetical global catastrophic scenario involving molecular nanotechnology in which out-of-control self-replicating machines consume all biomass on Earth while building more of themselves. I paused and looked around. The entire cavern had been sculpted by madmites who had left untold centuries ago to do the same somewhere else. I think the protocol failed a long time ago, buddy. Journey remained quiet. See, since the protocol failed, why not give it a shot now? Negative. This unit is physically incapable of breaching the Grey Goo Protocol. Physically unable to? I find that hard to believe. This unit's nanite colony was hardwired to be unable to create any nanite not connected to the colony. Fine. What are these nanites? Is that nanotechnology? What's nanotechnology? Nanites are an application of nanotechnology. Affirmative. Nanotechnology is the use of matter on an atomic, molecular, and supramolecular scale for industrial purposes. This was making my head spin. All these words didn't mean anything to me. I had to get some footing in the real world about them. Can you give me an example? This unit used nanotechnology to repair the rifle. Oh. Nanotechnology is the lost tech term for the armor's spirit. So you can't create another black cloud unless it's part of your own black cloud. Affirmative. There's got to be a way to twist this to my advantage. I could feel there was wiggle room here to tear in. I sat down and started to brainstorm ideas. Father broke me out of my thoughts a few minutes later, working with specific knife forms that relied on swapping hands on the knife mid-fight. "We'll need to go soon," he said, putting the knife back into his boot with satisfaction. "Staying for too long in one area attracts automatons. You'll have to get used to the suit on the move." "Sure, let me see if the pilgrims had anything on them." I took a few hesitant steps to the dead bodies. I didn't feel too comfortable with the idea of desecrating the dead bodies even more than I already had. As a scavenger, that was an odd thing to feel since part of our nature is to loot anything that isn't bolted down. But these were pilgrims. There was a sense of desecration when I thought about trying to find anything else to pick from their corpse. Journey's old owner, Cathita, well, she had died protecting these two. It looks like Father had the same thoughts as his left arm shot out quick, stopping me in my tracks. "That will bring down omens on us, boy. I understand your pragmatism, however the relic armor and weapons are enough. I'll not take more chances by bringing down the ire of the gods on our heads," Father said. I found myself agreeing with Father's words easily. Rather, I was hoping someone would tell me not do this. We both started to take a few steps, while I gave the pilgrims one last look. Journey highlighted the items they had without prompt, pinging something in the ground the moment it entered my sight. One skeletal hand lay clutching what looked like a black brick with a carrying handle. The armor was highlighting that item, insistent on its importance, a halo of orange surrounding it. "Hold on. Journey's trying to get my attention about that item," I said, pointing at it. Father glanced down, following my finger. I could almost see the gears running in his head. "I don't recognize this," he said. "I've seen and escorted plenty of pilgrims and pilgrimages, I've never seen this before." He didn't stop me as I approached the item, kneeling down to inspect it. It was a black brick with a handle on it, a skeletal hand wrapped around the grip. The glowing halo of orange from Journey's heads-up display labeled it Priority 1. "What's this?" I asked. No answer came. Right, I needed to get more used to these armor's quirks about talking. There's been a pattern I'd noticed: the armor stays real quiet unless it's obvious I'm talking to it. "Journey," I said, using its name to be as unambiguous as possible. "What is this thing?" The armor chimed in my speaker, Priority 1. Yes, I could read that, the HUD was making it abundantly clear. Can you tell me more about it?" "Journey. No data found," it answered back curtly. "But, you're highlighting it on my visor. Why?" "Item designated as Priority 1 by user, Lang, Cathita." Chapter 28, Reunion. The Crusader had set this as something important to guard. I couldn't know her motives until I could read the logs. Since this was her armor, I could at least try to protect whatever she'd marked important as a sign of respect. Reaching down, I pried it out of a long dead hand. On first glance, it looked like a file storage device of some sort. It didn't have any seams that showed it could open, except at the edges. Whatever this was, it was mechanical. That guess about it being a file storage got thrown out the airlock once I noticed no ways to connect the brick to any power supply. That means it had an internal supply, if it was electric in the first place. I started looking for openings. What I had found instead were buttons on the handle. Possible on-off switches? Flicking these did nothing, the item was probably out of power. Unlike occult knives, this device probably didn't store power like backup generators did, so there would be a finite life cycle. Searching further, I found what I'd been looking for. On its right side was a small valve and inscribed sigil for power. Jackpot! All I knew about this item so far was that Catheta died protecting it and that power was required. Fortunately, we did have plenty of power to spare. I shuffled over and grabbed one of the 3 spare power cells we had in stock, graciously donated by less than reasonable folks. A quick twist on the valve opened it up and power flowed freely as I dropped a small trickle of liquid, charging up the device in a few seconds. Since the brick was small, it didn't take much out of the power cell before capacity was reached. Now I flicked the power switch back to what was probably the activation. The brick lit up a few stylized runes in dim blue on its flat surface, but nothing else besides that. I rotated the device, looking for points of egress, and found that there were a few seams that were now more visible with the dim lighting, where the thing would probably open. All 4 corners and right under the handle. That part opened up with a tug, showing the plate had protected 2 buttons. One was labeled capture and the other connect. I pressed the connect button, but the box just flashed red and the switch flipped back. I guess that was a dead end for now or required something more. I toggled the capture button next and saw a telescopic tube shoot out of the front, followed by the sound of air being sucked. Looks like it was a mini vacuum cleaner. This could be a science kit designed to study small samples of material, at least from my first thoughts. I flipped the switch off and the tube retracted smoothly, the vacuum turned off. I'd have to dig into the logs to find out more about what this thing was. Keith, Father said to my side. A quick glance and I could tell what was on his mind without more words. We had to go. We've been here for too long. I need to take this with me, I said, hooking the black brick to my belt. It fit snugly, clearly made for this. Father shook his head to himself. What's your reason this time, boy? The armor's owner, she's marked this as priority 1. I don't think this was a pilgrimage, Father, I think they were on a mission. And maybe I might be able to help complete that mission, once we're back on the surface. That seemed to convince him. Fair enough. And now I suppose you will ask to follow the gold light further down into the depths. Got a better idea? No. He sighed. All my instincts are calling me a fool for following the unknown, but it led us to relic armor. It has proven trustworthy. I only don't agree with the direction we're going. If that light wanted to kill us, leading us to a second armor was the polar opposite of that plan. I don't know the destination or the exact goal the light had, but I can make a good case it wants us alive, and able to stay that way. We hadn't ascended at all, but until we found the lit tunnels again we'd have no way of knowing where we were going besides that light. We turned to the only tunnel leading out, which still had that golden light active. One quick thing to check before we continued forward, Journey, are you the one causing that? I asked again, pointing. I didn't expect a yes. Query must be specified further. The yellow light there, we followed it to get here, was that you? Negative. Do you know who did? Negative. It hadn't even known about the lights in the first place. In hindsight this made a lot of sense. Journey had been dead to the world, powerless. From its perspective, Catheta had just died a few hours ago and power had run out. Next thing it knows, a new user is taking over, and it's been a few centuries in the intermediate time. The AI was taking it well in stride, all things considered. Or it truly wasn't capable of caring. It certainly gave off the impression that this was business as usual. Maybe Catheta really was just another name on a long text file somewhere in its memory banks as far as Journey cared. Prepared? Father asked from the side, knife tucked securely to his boot and rifle in a relaxed carry. I'd been left with my scavenger pistol and Catheta's occult knife. As much as I'll ever be. I suppose this will double as running practice. Keep up, but don't be a fool and push yourself over the edge either. Your calf muscle is still wounded. I don't think I'll forget about that anytime soon. I chuckled. You might. The painkillers will make it seem as if nothing is wrong. Keep it in your mind. He turned and jogged off, following the yellow light. I made my way behind him, Journey matching my movements smoothly and letting me keep up. The suit had about 7 hours per power cell, and we had just about 3 left. We'd be cutting it close I think, but should have enough to make whatever side detour the gold light wanted. We moved after it, vaulting over obstacles and leaping chasms and rivers as we crossed through the tunnels. The first few times were a little nerve-wracking. Journey made the whole process easy and soon I was moving around like the armor wasn't there at all. Since we'd be on the run for some time now, I might as well do some investigating. Maybe I'll find out more about that black box. Journey, open up the last logs of catheta please. Input password. Bend me over metal, not this again. I sighed. I'm an administrator, right? I should have full access to everything, it's in the title. Affirmative. Negative. Logs were user locked. A password is required. Password hint has been attached. A hint? What hint? What I heard next was a woman's voice. It sounded like an old voice, with the telltale signs of age where each breath and word had a crinkle to it. Not ancient, but certainly on her way. Catheta, might have been an old woman. I hadn't expected that. My name is Catheta Lang, a crusader of the 5th Dran. I fear that I and the 2 disciples I'm charged to protect will be soon dead in this cavern. I've encrypted all my logs with Journey, my armor, and set the password as the 5th vow. If you are Imperial, I command you to bring these logs straight to the nearest cardinal. They will know what to do with the information. If you are not Imperial, I pray to the goddess that you might do the right thing anyways. Indulge an old woman's last wishes. And take care of Journey for me, whoever you are. He can be a capricious child. She cackled, then returned to a somber tone an instant after. Solaris Imperium, stranger. Do better than we did. The recording ended abruptly, leaving me alone in my thoughts again. A lot to unpack in that, more especially is the lack of things to unpack. She didn't mention anything about the priority 1 item, and kept things vague, likely on purpose. I hardly knew the first 4 vows of the Crusaders and I had no clue there was a 5th vow. Welp, nothing to do about it now. The black box had been attached to my hip easily, clearly made to be snapped to a belt like this. Whatever that box and logs were, we could worry about them later once I was back on my bed. Getting her logs to the nearest cardinal would be my next task once I got back home. High chances that the mission's data had long ago become irrelevant, but this wasn't about that. It's the principle of the thing. Also, getting haunted by the ghost of an Imperial was not on my to-do list. It was an hour in that I saw a notification on Journey's heads-up display. New connection established, it read. Lord Atias's voice burst over my helmet. Tenny Cent, is that you? Gods above, do you hear me? It sounded crackled, filled with static, but understandable. It was the best thing I'd heard in my life. We'd done it. Comms were in range to the expedition. We both quickly skidded to a stop and Father answered straight away, not even pausing to celebrate. I hear you. We survived the fall and have been making our way back up to the surface since. I'm relieved to hear your voice, Lord. I swear Tenny Cent, Atias laughed, you're practically deathless already, you tenacious old bastard. My sister's voice cut in right after. Father, where's Keith? His COMM signal isn't showing up with you. Kedra. Father replied in disbelief. How are you? He never mind, I'll ask later. He's with me and doing fine. We discarded his environmental suit a while back and replaced it with a new relic armor that we found. The comms went dead quiet as everybody processed through the implication. You found a relic armor down there. Lord Atius spoke through the silence. The armor's name is Journey, an old Crusader's relic. Keith is currently its owner now. Gods above. I'll buy you the first round myself. Another voice piped in, slightly higher pitch. I recognized it as the Shadow Song Prime, a prim and proper accent to his words. With respect, my lord, he stopped drinking years ago. Slipped my mind in the moment, Icos. I'm getting old these days, you know. He laughed through the comms, joy in his voice. We'll damned get him something else, details for later. And how's the young whelp, is he on comms yet? Yep, I read you all loud and clear. I answered. Journey showed the icons on the top right were working correctly, mine lit up as I spoke. Switching your tracker signal over to the new ping. Kedra said, dealing with the administration issues right off the bat. I'm really happy to hear your voice, Keith. Lord, Father asked carefully, before I could answer back. Question. No disrespect intended, why is my daughter among the search team? He might have sworn no disrespect, but there was an edge in his voice when he asked about his family. However, while Father was seething in his armor, there was only laughter over the comms from the other relic knights. She's, let's say, extremely persuasive. Atius sheepishly answered. Kedra made a clear and unambiguous vow that she'd come down no matter if we barred her way or not. Somehow Anka and Callum both backed her up. While I'm heartened to see a show of camaraderie this early in their careers, they all disobeyed direct orders from myself. I couldn't afford to send any of my knights to drag the three back to the convoy and lock them down, time was essential. So it was a choice of either bringing them with us or having the three fall behind alone and on foot. I had enough knights to carry them around, it wasn't a hard question to answer. Either she'd get a low chance to survive accompanied by relic users, or absolutely no chance by getting left behind on foot. Atius had decided the former was better. Though given his massive lifespan, I wondered just how much he valued a single life. I see. Father answered bluntly, unsatisfied, but unable to argue further. It made sense to me. Retainers literally had sacrifice in our vow of duty. All three were honoring the call. I'd spent my life making fun of that vow, believing it to be misplaced idealism at best. In hindsight, that hadn't been fair to the vow of duty retainers took. My selfless and stubborn sister was going after me no matter what. And her worst enemy had set aside their own agendas to honor their vow. Can't exactly have a dim view on that anymore when I clearly see the nobility it can inspire in people. More likely, thinking critically, I'd probably attached the Winterscar name to that vow over time without noticing. And I really didn't want to be a Winterscar. That's likely where all my animosity was coming from. Make no mistake, Winterscar, your daughter is going to see all kinds of storms once we're back with the clan. Icos, that goes for your own whelp too, and her friend. Disobeying a direct order from me does not go unpunished. God save me, this is the part I wish surface clan culture didn't venerate duty so much. Understood, Lord? You will, of course, see no argument from me. Father answered back, mirroring the Shadow Song Prime's own answer. I knew the risks I took. Kedra said coldly. And I would pay that price again if I had to. We'll deal with your insubordination later. Father said, with even more ice. For what it's worth, another knight added in, if she had more equipment to work with, I wouldn't be surprised if she really could handle herself alone down here. I don't think your daughter is capable of missing a shot, Winterscar. She's able to nail them even after they've adapted and started dodging. She's got more kills than Iron Reach. It seemed the knights had their own sense of humor, their voices cut in. By one. And I was about to destroy it too. She doesn't have relic armor. A different voice noted. I think that was the Windrunner Prime, I'd heard his voice before. She's Tennysen's God's damned daughter, a mini monster on her own, you can't. Cut down on the chatter, let's focus on getting them home. Atias cut in, all business now. Winterscar, full report, inventory first. 3 clips of ammunition left, 1 working rifle, 2 occult knives and a longsword, 1 grenade, 1 pistol. Enough rations for 3 more days. Water is low, but we can resupply en route once we find a stream. Power can last us a day and a half at current reserves for us both. He paused here for a moment, but continued. I took a booster 4 hours ago, estimating 16 to 20 hours before permanent damage sets in. Father answered back. Copy. Critical situations like yours are exactly when they're supposed to be used. We'll get you out before psychosis sets in. From the scanner it looks like you're about 3 clicks away from us. Confirm distance. Journey brought out a 3-dimensional map of the tunnels we'd explored so far, along with a glowing light further away in unknown territory, slightly higher than we were. Distance showed 3.2 miles. I noticed it had also shown the territory we'd traveled before I'd donned the armor. Confirmed distance. Father said. Have additional items to report besides inventory. Then he launched into the details. We've recovered an Imperial artifact that needs to be returned to the Pilgrims. Additionally, Keith discovered information I'm noting as Priority 1. It's a sensitive topic that needs to be discussed face to face. Too sensitive for comms. It could change everything we know about relic armor. Understood. Any other item to discuss? We were guided to the new relic armor by yellow gold lights that opened doors for us. We've been following since. We don't know who or what is behind the lights. Get me the path history. I saw a notification that Journey sent out the data package. The armors were listening into the conversation, assisting automatically when they could. It was uncanny how smart these things were, given how limited their personality had been. Lord Atias paused, then spoke up. It looks like your path is taking you away from us, however it's leading you in roughly the same direction as the original mission coordinates. Orders, sir. A pause followed as Lord Atias considered the best plan of action forward. While following the yellow light might seem like a safe idea, it's directly opposed to the main goal of reuniting as fast as possible. Additionally, you're on a timer, Winterscar. Set a course to meet up. Once we're all grouped up, our chances of survival increase significantly. We can knock you out of commission safely at that point. The earlier we knock you out, the faster your recovery will be. We'll bring you back up for medical attention first. The airspeeder has a dialysis machine we can use. I can lead another team back down to track the yellow light at a later time, and without non-relic knights in tow. Our objective hasn't been disturbed in centuries. I doubt a few more hours will change that. Understood. Get moving. 3 clicks should be less than a half hour, but the winding tunnels could increase the time. After that it'll be another 3 hours of travel to reach the airspeeder. Atias, out. The comms clicked off. Father glanced at me, and nodded. He started jogging down the tunnel, the one distinctly not lit by the yellow light. The gold flashed quickly at the side, but we'd been ordered to ignore it for now. Sorry, we'll come back in a bit, I muttered, and turned to join my father, following the doors that weren't lit, in the general direction of Atias. The light followed us, appearing at the next few rooms, always insistently pointing in one general direction while we continued to move on course to meet with the rescue party. It never stopped with that intensity, as if pleading us to continue behind it. Soon, using Atias's coordinates as a guide, we'd reached the green-lit tunnels once more. After that, our underground tour would reach its end. As far as adventures went, solid 5 stars out of 5, can't complain considering the loot. A holy mission, relic armor, an occult longsword and companion knife. We were hauling real treasure. Chapter 29, The Friends We'd Made Along the Way. The upper reaches were more disheveled than previous sites. Now outright rock cave-ins blocked many of the tunnels forward. I didn't know if the further up we went the less mites would travel around to repair damage, but it certainly looked like time had done a number to this place. Large scratches and gouges above the rock cave-ins pointed a picture of older fights that must have once raged around here. I even spotted a few metal spikes, the same kind that those barnacle turrets had fired out from the ceiling. These obstacles slowed down our progress greatly, often forcing us to backtrack once we'd reached dead ends. We stopped only once on the run for a break. The initial flask of water I'd split between us hours ago had run dry. Fortunately we found a river in one of the tunnels we jogged through. I peered at the slowly flowing water. Under the ice layer, lights showed, illuminating the whole trickle with a pale almost magical dim teal glow. Father punched the protective cap of ice on the river, cracking off a chunk. Then he dipped his water reservoir into it, filling the item up quickly. I unhooked Cathada's old flask reservoir and followed suit, filling up after Father had gotten his own done. It was extremely cool to drink and made for a good refreshment compared to the stale water I'd been carrying all this time. I almost can't believe we're close to the end of all this. I breathed out, sitting by the stream. The scanner showed only 1.2 clicks left. The winding tunnels and frequent cave-ins would stretch that out, but soon it would be all said and done. Keep your wits about you, boy. We're not out yet. Of course, Father, I'm not about to drop my guard after all we've been through. I took another long drink from the straw, then we stood back up and continued our way. The pace we set was brisk and could be maintained for a long time, even with my calf being wounded as is. There was still something on my mind. I'd been pushing it back, but that was no way to handle issues. What did Atius mean by psychosis? It is no longer anything to concern yourself with. We're hours away from reaching the rescue party, he said, continuing his pace and not looking back. Don't lie to me. Not after all this. He paused, as if considering whether to let me in the loop or not. As the booster continues its effects, my mind will break down, in a manner of speaking. Again, there isn't cause for concern. Once we reach the rescue party, they'll induce a coma to put a stopgap halt in the effects. I'll have my blood manually cleared using that dialysis machine. All airspeeders have one. The recovery process can take a week. What sort of breakdown are we talking about, in specifics? I asked testily. Lucidity starts to fade at the early stages. At that point, I'll become erratic. Hallucinations come next after several more hours, usually a mix of auditory and visual. Paranoia and aggression set in after. Near the end stages I'll stop being able to recognize people. At that point, I become a danger to you or anyone around me. I was prepared to handle it when the first symptoms started showing. I know how much time I have before effects become more than my will alone can handle. This would have been handy to know. Oh hey son, by the way, in a few hours I might go berserk and murder you in under a second. Rage instantly churned inside, lit by panic. Why did you keep this from me? I yelled. This wasn't the first time either so far. Again and again, you hold off on information until you have no choice but to tell me. The same with your arm. What's going on? Why are you like this? Father ground out, it was for the best. The best? What God's damned reason do you have? I don't have to explain anything to you, boy. There was that note of anger in his voice, matching my own. Seems to run in the family. It's you and me down here, and we've both got relic armor. I'm not some charge you have to escort anymore. I said. We need to work together, and this whole cloak and dagger scrap shit isn't helping anything. Fine. You want my reason? He turned to stare me down, the jog completely forgotten. You're a boy, his finger jabbed out against my armor plate, pressing the point. Placed in a situation that would break most men. You needed to feel that someone was in control, that there was some hope for survival. Do you get that? Or do I have to spell it out for you? Maybe you missed the cue, I shot back, pushing his hand away, I fucking grew up while you were passed out on vodka each day, father. The moment I'd said that, regret hit me hard. But the venom had already been speared out. If he was hurt by the comment, he made no mention of it. I've seen others break down for less, he said. And they were adults trained for situations like this one. Soldiers. The more I told you about the reality of our situation, the more hopeless it would all seem. That could break you. It didn't. Look at me, I'm still fine after hearing all of it. Unless there's even more rat shit you're keeping from me again. You're fine now, only after getting the relic armor. This was what truly gave us a chance. Everything seems possible now because of that armor. You would have broken down otherwise. You can't know that. Father snarled, rounding on me. Hands shot out for my collar on reflex, but instead his gauntlets simply collided with my own armor. Journey remained fixed in position, utterly unmoving against the grab. We both stared at each other in confusion. The roles and rules between us had been changed, now that we both had armor. I was a relic knight. He would never again be able to just grab and slam me on the ground. I think he realized this chapter of our lives had come to an end at just the same moment I had. He took a step back, turning around to continue down the path. I heard him over comms, his voice soft this time, all fire gone. It broke me, Keith. I didn't believe we would live. And if it made me give in, what would it have done to you? Understand, damn you. That couldn't be true. My mind reeled away from the implication. But you kept fighting, I said. I didn't see you didn't give up. You never gave up. There's no way someone like father just broke. He chuckled at that, a deep throaty thing. It was easy to keep going with no future in sight. I'm well practiced. Then he stopped in his tracks, turning to look at me again. Keith, what are the virtues of the gods? Yours. Talon. Tsuya. Resolve, tenacity, resilience. I said. There are gods for a reason. We were exiled from the underground, just as the gods were exiled from the surface. Do you see? These are the values they represent because they are us, they struggle like we do each day. Even if I give up, I still fight to the end, as all exodosites should. Even if that end comes at the tip of my own weapon. This is even more important to a relic knight above all. We swore a vow to our house. To our clan. You need to accept what we are. He turned and continued down the cavern. I followed behind. We were quiet for a long time after, jogging through the unending tunnels chasing after something we didn't quite understand. I don't get it. I finally said. Why pick now, of all times, to grow a heart? Why go out of your way to protect me like this? If you knew trying to keep me alive was doomed to fail, then the next priority would have been to return home yourself. I was ordered to keep USA. Cut the scrap shit. If duty and honor mattered to him that strongly, it would matter over family for sure. The armor can't be lost down here. Duty would compel you to take the strongest possible measures to reach the surface alive, or at least alive enough to return that armor for House Winterscar to continue, even if that meant leaving me behind. One life is meaningless compared to Winterscar. So why did you come back for me? You knew I'd be dead weight at best. From a purely numbers point of view, outright losing an entire house was less painful than losing an armor. Winterscar could be folded into another house. It was his duty to make sure that armor made it back home. Father sputtered. That wouldn't be it, he grew more quiet. It was the right thing to do. He didn't sound convinced himself, as if this answer was just as much a lie to me as it was a lie to himself, and he knew it. Sacrifice had a lot of meanings, not all of them about losing your life. He busied himself instead by making his way to the end of the tunnel rather than give me a more straight answer. A familiar whistling sound struck the rocks above us just as we passed by the entrance, cutting off whatever his next answer could have been. In hindsight, I should have considered something about these green-lit tunnels. These predictable green-lit tunnels. We didn't realize we'd walked into an ambush until it was far too late to do anything about it. Inside this pocket we found ourselves on the wall of a chasm. Concrete bridges spanned across the chasm gap, long in the distance. But here, there was only one thin bridge possible. The metal spike whistled above, striking the entryway we'd come from. I spun around, only to witness the trap spring shut. The path caved in. Exactly like all the other cave-ins that had blocked our path. The entry had been whittled away previously, unstable enough that one hit would send it all crashing. With the way behind us blocked, the only way forward was across a narrow bridge. I saw that our side of the chasm had been meticulously cleared of any rock cover possible. We'd been funneled into a trap. Our friend here didn't know where we'd gone, but it knew we were going up. While we had been spending time with the dead Imperials or yelling at one another, it hadn't forgotten. And it had been busy planning out revenge. One single automaton hung from the ceiling. Missing one leg, armor riddled with bullets. With a barnacle turret jury-rigged onto its shell. The spider cackled darkly. The barnacle turret simply turned and opened fire. Father's reaction speed was impressive, but the spider's was even quicker. It already lifted its front legs, blue shield activating and protecting the vulnerable barnacle as Father traded weapon fires with the turret. The bullets had no effect on the spider's shield, but the spike certainly did on the relic armor. His shield flared out, taking the hit. Father halted fire, not wanting to waste bullets on a target that was clearly invulnerable. Keith! Sprint for the tunnel! He shouted and began his own mad dash across the bridge. Without any means of dealing damage at range, the spider could just whittle us to pieces over time. We had to get out. That plan was quickly cut short as the spider dropped right on the center, guarding the way out against Father's charge. Two limbs shot out at the incoming relic knight, forcing him to dive away and backtrack. Another spike flew at him and struck him on the chest, forcing him further back in a spark of blue shielding. It was clear we weren't going to be able to make it past the automaton without a fight. Any other ideas? I shot out at him. Just one. He growled, drawing out his knife with his left hand, flipping the blade hilt down while he unsheathed the imperial longsword in his main hand. He ducked another spike, and rose back up in a full Kialor stance, a style that maximized the reach of a longsword with the close quarter ability of a knife. A stance that required both arms to work in perfect unity. His left arm took to the stance with perfect pose. He waited for the next spike to fly at him, twisting around and charging forward the moment it sailed by. I reached down and drew out my own knife, then followed behind wordlessly, the relic armor transferring my movements smoothly. Father raced ahead and slid down, an attacking limb missing over his head. The creature didn't let that failure discourage it. It struck back violently with more limbs, keeping Father busy. In seconds I had made my own way into range and then promptly got sent flying from the creature's first swing. The thing struck as fast as a pipe snake, my reactions couldn't keep up. One moment I was about to reach it, and the next moment a massive limb obscured my whole vision. Father on the other hand was in a completely different league of skill compared to mine. And this time he had no disadvantages to deal with. He dodged and twirled against those lightning hits. Attacks were weaved with each dodge, and all were vicious. After a roll and a half, I slid to a stop on my knees, thankfully away from the edge of the chasm. As if to add insult, I was hit by a metal spike as a parting gift the moment I lifted my head back up. Journey's shields flared hard, holding fast against the direct hit. The blow still knocked my head backwards, and threw me onto my back. I could see it already lining up the next shot from the corner of my eye. The barnacle couldn't target Father easily since the madman was far too close. So it went after the next best target. Me. Chapter 30, No Plan Survives Contact with the Enemy. I rose back up on my feet, only to get shoved backwards as another metal spike struck the center of my chest. I could see the blinding flicker of blue as Journey's ancient shields flared to life, breaking the blow's bite. Still, the force carried me back to the floor with no mercy. Warning! Shields low. Journey chimed in my ear. Scrap shit. These things were too gods damned fast to react against. How the scrap does father do it? Unless, he doesn't. If they were too fast to react against, maybe what he was doing was predicting them ahead of time. Given Journey's shields, I wouldn't be able to tank that many more direct hits, so it was all or nothing. Once more, I stood back up, and this time I twisted to the side, blindly. Whistling passed right by my helmet's side. Scraps, I had dodged a shot. I took a few steps and dove to the side erratically. The spike still struck home, though clearly off-center as I felt my shoulder jerk backwards. Journey didn't flare its shield for that one, letting the armor take the glancing hit. I saw parts of the gold ornaments break off, but the damage was otherwise superficial. The turret remained eerily leveled, the long barrel stabilized despite the wild movements of the spider under it. And it was clear the spider was having a fight for its life with the amount of motion going on. I was onto something, only I didn't have the agility to pull it off like father did. Except I didn't need father's agility. I had an intelligent armor that could move for me. Time to cheat and put my thumb on the scale. Journey. A little help here. Specify query. Journey said as I threw myself flat on the floor again to avoid another spike. My impromptu dodge worked this time, with the spike flying above my head. The intervals between fires seemed consistent. Anything you can do to make me fight better in close range? Or help me dodge those things automatically? I said, rolling to the right, exiting into a sideways sprint. Options available. Combat system can auto-correct movements. Warning, user may be injured. Administrator override required. Another spike sailed by as I changed directions mid-sprint, using my gut to tell when the shots were coming. Yeah, that's fine, just do it. Administrator override confirmed. Lowering priority to emergency only. Releasing safety locks. Loading module. Combat module, online. I didn't feel any different. That is up until another spike flew right at me while I was distracted. The suit instantly twisted my shoulders sideways for me, narrowly avoiding the shot across my breastplate. I could swear I even saw the few fractions of a second that the spike flew by the chest plate, small sparks flying off. It felt like someone had grabbed my entire back, neck and shoulders, then twisted everything violently to the left. There wasn't any pain, probably because of the pain inhibitor drug that was still pumping through my system, but I certainly felt my muscles stretch hard against the shift. Just as fast as the override had come, I was free again. Disoriented but free. I took the cue and charged forward again with more confidence this time, knife in hand, though keeping it off. Didn't want to stab myself by accident if I got sent out for more flying lessons. Father and the spider had been focused on each other in the meantime, stuck in a deadly duel. Small cuts had started to form around the automaton's legs, battle damage accumulated from the fray. The occult knife would bite down on the ceramic limbs, cutting straight for important sections with unerring accuracy. Limbs that seemed to have escaped the reach of the knife would be sliced by a long sword with surprising range. Each attack could have easily severed the whole limb, if the automaton had not been reacting as fast as father was moving. It was barely keeping pace, however, always pulling the limb away seconds before those blades could find something important. And in seconds I'd be among the fight, breaking that delicate balance of power. I dove into the spider's range of attack, preparing for the creature to try and throw me back again. The creature lashed out as I expected. A quick, panicked response to clearing me out of the way as fast as it could before father overwhelmed it. I tried to duck and slide under the hit like father had done on his initial approach. A second later realized my attempt would fail, the creature had remembered and learned from this already. The sweeping attack it sent out was lower and the spider had already corrected itself to strike even lower. Before I could even think about my possible recovery options, Journey twisted my legs back into a crouch, stopping all my forward motion onto the heels of my boots. It leaped upwards immediately after, bleeding the built-up rotational energy into a midair roll. The attacking swipe flew right under me. Journey had made the right call. Again, it felt like an unstoppable force had seized every part of my legs and forced me to move like a puppet. My chest and arms were locked in the correct pose for the leap, which brought a sense of claustrophobia, followed quickly by disorientation as the unexpected jump didn't sync with my running rhythm. I hit the ground and fumbled, turning it into another roll from sheer training reflex. I came out of that roll disoriented and attacking like a rabid animal, no plan other than to strike. The knife in my hand lit up with a bright blue edge and I slashed out almost blindly at the nearest limb, only getting an inch of the blade into the target. The limb withdrew with quick jerky motions. I hounded after it, brandishing my knife, slashing into the air. Each time it moved its limbs away from my range. Was this effective? Not in the least. That wasn't the point. I wasn't aiming for a solid hit, my own skills were on a far lower level than this thing. Instead, each time it had to defend itself against me, I'd force it to divert attention away from the true threat. I wasn't a solider, my job was support. And by the gods, I'd do my part. A low hissing started to come from the creature. Its behavior seemed to change from one of smug triumph to fear. I think the full predicament it had placed itself into was dawning on it. It remembered the first lesson it had learned: Father was not an opponent you could afford to forget about. And here I was, a gnat in the proverbial house, forcing it to commit one of its 5 limbs to hold me back lest I start cutting important bits. Leaving it with only 3 to hold itself up, and 1 to hold off Father. If it still had 6 arms, it might have been able to do more, but with 5, resources were limited. And it hadn't anticipated the upgrades we'd acquired. I sliced my knife through thin air, but overswung. Another limb speared out, attempting to skewer me through my armor. Journey twisted me again with a violent last-second jerk. The stab skidded across my breastplate, the blue shielding flaring up and deflecting the blow away. I could hear a deep set of cracks, but it didn't come from the armor, it sounded too muted, like it had come from within me. Alert! Journey said. Rib cage fractures detected. Ah! This is what Journey meant by damage. The armor could easily break my bones or tear a muscle if it moved counter to my own motions at the wrong moment. And given how frantic combat was, there'd be too many chances to roll snake eyes. Tsuya save me, was this what Relic Knights had to deal with? These fights were too fast to follow. At least we were making progress. That attempt to skewer me had cost the machine. A lifelong disciple of war, Father was absolutely relentless. He gave the creature no quarter, each move methodical and practiced. A slice of blades always followed each dodge without fail. The spider's attacks failed again and again. Each swing would cost it. Each stab would be narrowly missed. Each feint countered. Father moved mechanically, as if victory was a foregone conclusion. That the only thing left was executing the right amount of strikes and dodges until the spider made an error that it couldn't recover from. So the creature made the only rational choice left, it gave up on the dream to murder us and tried to run instead. The machine screamed in rage and slammed its full body down hard on the bridge, causing cracks and fissures to snap out as the concrete shattered. Parts of its own ceramic armor had snapped from the hit, but the damage was done. Father didn't have time to yell out a warning, the bridge crumbled apart, taking all of us down with it. I lost track of our target in the falling rubble, too disoriented in the fall. The void yawned below us, easily fitting all the broken chunks of the bridge. My headlights quickly caught a glance at what lay at the bottom. A massive river of water, churning even more as the first bits of the broken bridge collapsed into the water. I braced myself, not knowing what to expect next. Preparing for cold and pain. I didn't feel anything as the armor plunged into the water. Belatedly, I remembered relic armor was vacuum sealed. The river picked us up and threw us into the churn. I was spun, slammed around into the rocks, and all I could see was bubbles and illuminated darkness. Occasionally rocks passed by my view, the headlights showing details only for a moment before they passed. Up or down lost meaning, my balance had been completely shot. The only thing on my mind was to clench my right hand as hard as I could. I can't afford to lose that knife in this turmoil. Panic welled up inside until I heard Father's clear voice in my helmet. "Stay calm, boy. Relic armor is airtight and shielded. You won't drown and a few impacts won't damage the armor." I flailed around, out of control, but he was right that I wasn't dying or being hurt by any of the impacts against the rock walls. "Stabilize yourself. The armor will sink us to the bottom soon enough. We'll find a place to regroup." I felt the ground first on my left shoulder blade, and quickly found myself rolling on the riverbed as the water continued to force me forward. With a bit more control, I twisted myself so that my feet followed the direction of the current, the heels grinding 2 trails into the loose sand. Ahead, I saw a dim headlight illuminated the underwater stream. Father's. He must have gone further downstream than I did. "I see you, boy," he said over the comms. "Hang on." The light in the depths turned, and then grew nearer. A surge threw me off my feet, rolling me over on my back and putting me into a lopsided spin. I almost overshot him. His hand whipped out, catching my own stretched out arm in a death grip. I returned the favor, holding tight to him too. The current continued to drag us, but now I was getting a much better sense of the river bottom, my feet touching down sporadically. We were still going in one direction, but at least there wasn't that disorientation. "We'll be fine," Father said, already taking perfect bouncing steps to keep himself both upright and in control against a tumble. "Take deep breaths." "The spider," I gasped out. "It's out here too. If it had followed us here, the river would be a disadvantage to it. The turret would be useless and its own attacks slowed. We, on the other hand, don't need to strike hard or fast. The blades will cut through the creature no matter the speed. The monster knows that. I would guess it has burrowed into the riverbed while we were swept downstream." The stream continued to yank us wildly, but now with Father's help, I was getting the hang of those large floating steps we were taking. Up until a set of rocks blocked our path. We hit those hard, and Father's hand pushed my chest down into the riverbed, reducing the surface area and giving me more control again. The water continued to surge over us, but our feet were planted firmly on the lip of the rockbed, with our backs down against the riverbed. We were finally stopped and had a moment to breath. I could hear panting over the comms. Couldn't be sure if they were my own or Father's. Probably both of us. "Gods, I didn't think that thing would chase after us," I said. His headlights illuminated the water, moving back and forth. "Neither did I," Father said. "All the fire teams I've been on, we've never retreated from a nest before. This is the first time I've seen what happens in a draw. Think it'll keep chasing us?" "I don't know everything, boy. What I know is that their behavior was always greedy, often fighting among themselves if a target was exposed or vulnerable. In a fight they are defense-focused, skittish almost. When we fought it, the other spiders didn't interfere, they clustered around to watch me fight. I'm not sure if they have some sort of code or if that creature has marked us as property. It isn't out of the possibilities that it still continues to chase after us, even knowing we outmatch it." I took a moment to think, trying to put myself in the creature's shoes. Think like it would. Find out hints to see what it might do next. The rock cave-ins. The trap. The way it had cleared off the sides of the bridge so that we'd have no cover ahead of time. It had even thought to bring a turret on its back. Not to mention it had considered a backup plan, likely weakening the bridge ahead of time in case it needed to retreat. This thing was smart. What had been its full plan? The spikes wouldn't have slowed Father for long. So they were meant for me. With just my environmental suit, and the lack of cover, I'd have been killed like a goat within the first few seconds of the fight. From there, it likely had assumed it could batter past Father's defense since the last time the creature had seen us, Father's left arm was out of commission. The plan it had come up with was solid. It only failed because it had been based on outdated information. Something it couldn't have guessed ahead of time. The creature was smart. It knew it couldn't beat us in a straight fight anymore. Whatever plan it came up with next, it'll be built on current information. You said they are greedy, right? I asked. The headlights shook confirmation. As far as I've seen how they behave outside of combat. I've never seen them out of their nests and into the wild like this. He said. Then we should assume the little monster will chase after us. And it'll have to come up with a better plan for the next round. This time around it found us because it knew we were going up. Do these creatures have other ways of tracking us down? If I knew how they find us, we'd be planning ahead for those tactics from the very start. Father said flatly. Oh. Day. If we didn't know exactly how the creature could find us, then maybe we could take a guess at it. I had to think through how this creature would view the situation. If it were me, knowing I couldn't defeat my enemies anymore with firepower, then I'd fall back on the second best plan, use the environment. If it can't beat us in a straight fight, my guess is that it will try to separate us somehow, or lay a trap to do the work for it. We will need vigilance. It is possible the machine's programming only allows it to leave a certain range of the nest, or that it will only attempt to give chase once. But we can't rely on that. Yet, but before all that, we need to find a way out of this chasm. At that Father stood up in the darkness, water now trying to force him downstream. That part won't be an issue. There are underground lakes everywhere, this river must lead to one. Keep an eye for the shoreline. Are you ready? I stood up after him, and together we jumped off the bedrock, letting the water carry us further down. We'd been washed downstream for possibly 10 more minutes before shorelines started to populate the sides. By then the stream had died down from a torrent to more of a mellow ride, which ended with a waterfall into a far more tranquil lake. My stomach lurched as we fell off the waterfall into the lake, the relic armor absorbing the impact with no issues. We sank like rocks down into the depths of the lake. On hitting the bottom, Father and I began to march our way back up the banks, onto the shoreline. The relic armor ripped through the water, powerful enough that even the murky depths weren't doing much to slow our march. In moments, water streamed off my armor as we emerged from the lake onto what felt like rocky sand. We'd found ourselves still underground, of course. And with an interesting view. Half of the cave wall on the other side simply wasn't there, instead showing a full view over the pseudo-city we'd left hours ago. This was a cliff cut into the mountains of sorts, and clearly naturally, the cut seemed like a straight line right through, as if the city had a massive invisible cube that cut the surrounding mountains. It caught me speechless. Lights twinkled across the empty city, like stars in the sky. Old broken-down might-built buildings lined the area around us, right up to the edge of the cliff. The architecture of these buildings was starkly different, more like welded metal put together in more circular shapes than the square concrete of the abandoned city. No mites anywhere here, this might have been a previous city that existed before the teal mites had moved in. I could see lights still working in these new buildings. Not the artificial mite ones, real honest to the gods light bulb lighting. Cloth and tapestries draped around these buildings, tent-like for some. Almost as if this had been somewhere people lived in. Father surfaced after me, water crashing off the frame of his armor. He didn't gawk around like I did, instead he checked his supplies to verify everything had made it. A soldier to the bone, his priorities had sightseeing dead last. Status, he barked out at me. I checked through my own supplies to confirm I hadn't lost anything in the crash. This would have been a disaster if I were still in my environmental suit. Those absolutely weren't made to be submerged underwater. If I hadn't drowned in the river, I'd be dead of hypothermia soon enough. Everything on my belt had survived, even the first aid kit. A check inside showed all the contents perfectly dry. Those kits were a lot more air-sealed than I had thought. Journey, how far off course did we go? I asked. Additional 3 miles have been added between the current location and expedition search party. The armor chimed in response. Rat shit. Could be worse. Father said gruffly. Winterscar to search party, come in. The comms crackled for a moment, but then a voice blessedly answered back. This is a TS, report. Had a run-in with an automaton that knocked us off a bridge. We've been set back. Copy. We've run into a few on our own, but are still making good progress. Can you still make it to the meeting point? This area of the city might have an elevator. We're going to investigate to see if there's a way to return to the same level. If so, we'll be able to continue our path in your general direction. Time box it to 30 minutes and then we'll reconsider options. Understood. Winterscar out. The comms clicked shut. Father strode up to one of these buildings. He stayed quiet for a moment, hanging by the walls. That was your first combat encounter as a knight. You did good this fight. He said. Your skills have massively improved. I haven't seen someone master armor this fast. Quick enough to dodge attacks from a spider with only a few hours of experience. On reflex, I tried to scratch the back of my head sheepishly. The armor made that a moot point. About that. Not exactly my skills per SE. I had Journey take over dodging for me. Relic armors can do that. He said, stunned for a moment. Then his left hand opened and closed a few times as he rose it up, glancing down to it. A small chuckle escaped his lips. Of course they can. You are full of surprises, boy. It's the good old time-honored tradition of our house, finding any way to cheat. I only got more creative and applied it to combat. He walked by, patting my shoulder gruffly. Whichever manner you've chosen to apply your skills, it's helped turn the tide of that battle. Don't ignore that. Had the creature not had a plan to escape, it would be dead at our feet. It was a moment of awkwardness between us. I didn't know what to say, and he clearly didn't either. Instead he drew his hand back and continued to examine the surroundings as if this moment hadn't happened. I recognize this building's architecture. He said. The last city that had this also had mechanical infrastructure. A lot of it. Those elevators you mentioned. And since there's lights here, then this part of the city has power. He gazed over the lake, where more of the city lay. Unlike the concrete one, this metal city looked like a complete mess of buildings stacked against each other in any way that fit, with wide and winding streets. If there were elevators in that metal jungle, I don't know if I'd trust them. Journey, know anything about this area? Negative. All logged maps are out of date and no longer match the landscape. Any way to scan around for it? Might speed us up. If we can get our hands on some map, we'd go through here faster. Last time we'd found a terminal that held a map. Maybe we could make do without that? Father shook his head. Active scanning is a last resort option. It lights a torch in the dark, everyone around will see you. And we weren't out of danger yet. Not by a long shot. And not with a possible angry spider plotting vengeance somewhere behind us.